Derek didn't know how the meal had ended, and by the time he stepped out of the restaurant, he couldn't even recall what he'd eaten. Austin still had to go shoot a variety show. After meeting up with his assistant, he said goodbye to Derek, then suddenly leaned in and asked, "Was the chicken soup good?" Derek nodded. "It was decent." Austin's eyes instantly crinkled into a smile as he said gently, "I'll let Mom know. Next time, I'll ask Andy to make more. It was meant for you this time, but I ended up drinking most of it." "All right." Austin put on his mask and wrapped the scarf around his neck a few times, covering most of his face. His gaze slid past Derek's shoulder toward William just stepping through the door. Said nothing, simply gave a slight nod, then turned and walked away. Derek didn't know what could have passed in that brief moment of eye contact. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, turned around, only to see William leaning against the doorframe, crunching on a hard candy he'd just picked up from the counter, while Edwin sat beside him. Sunlight cut clearly between them like a line drawn down the middle, but it had to be said, they really did look remarkably alike. Tiny beams of light scattered across their thick eyelashes, shadows resting beneath their lower lids, and even that sharpness in their deep-set eyes seemed softened just a little by quiet understanding. Derek glanced over both of them, then after some thought, turned to Edwin and asked, "What's next on your schedule?" He'd already seen the filming site, had also taken a look around. Shouldn't it be time to head back now? But before Edwin could say anything, William spoke up instead. "I've been wondering since earlier. Why do you always address him so formally and carefully? Like a butler. What's the point? Are you trying to keep distance on purpose, afraid of getting involved or something?" The words didn't come out quite right, though his usual careless tone remained. It sounded more like a challenge than anything else, but Derek clearly didn't see anything wrong with how he spoke. "What's so bad about calling him sir? Those two words are absolutely perfect. It doesn't feel too distant, and if you soften the tone a little, people notice something unusual. They'll naturally fill in the blanks about your relationship, without being overly familiar or making others uncomfortable. It's just right for how things are between them." Could William even suggest a better option? Besides, plenty of others call their partners sir. He genuinely likes this kind of subtle distance. He immediately shot back, "Mind your own business. What do I call you? You're such a dull one." The moment the words left his mouth, he noticed Edwin lazily lifting his eyelids to glance over. Derek locked eyes with his calm gaze, and suddenly realized his remark might have been a bit off. He nervously rubbed his nose, a faint blush creeping onto his face. He'd been so quick to defend himself that he'd forgotten how delicate their relationship had become. He wanted to explain that he hadn't originally said it for any playful reason. He just thought it was more polite at first, and over time it had simply become convenient. He hadn't really known what else to call him, so he'd never changed it, but William was watching closely, leaving him no chance to clarify. He could only watch as Edwin gave a faint, half-smile that clearly meant he'd misread the whole situation. He decided to blame it all on William instead and turned sharply to glare at him. "You!" Edwin suddenly reached out and gently gripped Derek's fingers, lightly pressing his knuckles. "Me liking it is enough," he said casually, glancing at William as if by accident. Those words stuck in William's throat instantly. He scowled and kicked a small stone on the ground, muttering grumpily, "Fine. Don't you have a performance this afternoon? 3 of us hanging out like fools by the gate. I'm heading back." Derek didn't respond. He just asked, "Will James come pick you up?" Edwin said, "He's on leave." Derek frowned. "Huh." Edwin rubbed his temple absently, lowering his voice. "James said he hasn't been feeling well lately. I gave him a few days off, and I'm kind of worn out myself." Derek sensed there was more beneath the words. William snorted, turned his head away, and rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, "Never heard you say you were tired when fighting for power." But Derek didn't pay any attention. He just pressed on. "So how will you get back then?" Edwin gently pressed the tip of his finger against Derek's knuckles again, noticing how uneasy he looked. Like he wanted to pull away but hesitated, not wanting to seem rude in front of William. So he quietly let go and rested his hand back on his leg. "I've taken a break for myself," Edwin said. Derek suddenly seemed to understand what he meant. "The atmosphere here is nice," Edwin added when Derek stayed silent, deciding to be clearer. "It's perfect for a vacation," Derek said flatly, "but there seem to be so many filming crews around lately. Hotels are probably already full." Edwin glanced toward William and asked, Can't you let me stay with you? No, that wouldn't work, Derek insisted, waving his hands. Then, worried he might seem too nervous and draw William's suspicion, he added quickly, I have lines to memorize at night. I don't want to disturb Edwin's rest. There are late-night shoots sometimes. I finish late, and mornings are tough. Often need to wake up in the early hours for makeup and styling. Plus, my sleep isn't great. It's fine. I've gotten used to it. Derek stared, bewildered. What exactly have you gotten used to? He didn't notice William beside him looking visibly unwell, but thankfully, Edwin seemed to just be joking around, not actually planning to stay with him. It wasn't until they returned to the set that Derek slowly realized their production team was staying at a hotel owned by Moo Group. So logically, there should have been one private suite on the top floor reserved just for Edwin. Derek almost thought he'd planned it all along, deliberately teasing him right in front of William while using their pretend marriage as an excuse to keep things going. Where once Derek had been torn between wondering, is Edwin actually interested in me? And am I just reliving that old teenage arrogance? Now he was leaning clearly toward the first possibility. Edwin really might have a soft spot for him, but he sat dazed in the studio, turning it over and over, still couldn't figure out why. Could it be some kind of ripple effect? Night fell deeply, the lanterns along the street casting a dull glow. The flickering light stretched shadows long across the ground. A cold wind swept through the alley entrance, carrying the damp scent of earth and the musty odor unique to narrow lanes. Gabriel staggered forward, leaning against the wall for support. His hurried breaths and panicked footsteps echoed through the quiet alley, occasionally interrupted by the distant, relentless sound of horse hooves following close behind. Gabriel's slender figure vanished into the shadows of the alley, trembling uncontrollably. A sliver of moonlight peeked through the clouds, and under its pale glow, his clothes were soaked in mud, stained with dried blood near his shoulder. His once confident face now looked worn and exhausted. Cracked lips as if long without water, a pale face beaded with sweat that vanished instantly in the biting wind. Gabriel remembered it was the third day since he'd barely escaped, but those people still hadn't let him go. The roads out of the city were sealed off, with strict checks on everyone passing through. After hiding in the city for 3 days, he was finally spotted by patrol soldiers at dusk. He had once believed that after leaving the academy, he'd have enough time to build his future, turning every dream from sleepless nights into reality. If fortune favored him, perhaps he could live to see a peaceful world. Roads free of suffering, people living in safety and stability. That might be the best tribute for his legacy centuries from now. Then history would write its verdict, with all deeds judged by future generations. That wouldn't be so bad, but fate had no plan to spare him. He thought back to what Anthony had said in class months ago. He wondered where that distant, reserved friend was now. If he'd hear of his death tomorrow, would he again dismiss him as too naive? Suddenly, the sound of hooves stopping echoed from the alley's entrance. Then came the clink of armor and weapons, followed by steady footsteps drawing near. The icy wind bit at Gabriel's face, but he barely felt it. Only a quiet sorrow welled up, as if this was simply meant to be. Just then, a cold, damp hand grabbed his coat and yanked him sharply into the dark beside the alley. Before he could react, someone covered his mouth. The sharp scent of plum blossoms filled his senses, familiar beyond words. Moments later, a faint creaking sound whispered through the silence. Gabriel's heartbeat shot up, nearly stealing his breath. "Don't make a sound," the person said softly, releasing his mouth and pulling him down behind a pile of firewood to hide. Time passed without measure. Clouds drifted across the sky, then faded away, only to return once more. Heavy footsteps drew near, then slowly receded into the distance. All strength drained from Gabriel's body. When he tried to stand, his legs wobbled and he stumbled sideways. Just as the other person reached out to help, they both fell to the ground together. A sharp intake of breath. "Sorry, I don't have any strength left," Gabriel murmured, his voice trembling slightly as he looked up at the other man's face under the pale moonlight. To his surprise, Anthony hadn't been doing well either these past few months. Dark circles shadowed his once pretty eyes, and his usually fair skin had lost all color, appearing almost hollow. As Gabriel glanced at the hand resting on his shoulder, he noticed it was covered in chilblains. Far from the delicate hands of a scholar, more like those of someone who worked hard outdoors. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. But soon, Anthony let out a soft laugh. So Gabriel can be this undone too. Gabriel managed a weak smile, his voice hoarse as he said, "Thank you." Anthony's gaze swept over him carefully, taking in his disheveled clothes, the stains of mud, the dried traces of blood, and the torn edge of his sleeve. His eyes sparkled with quiet amusement, as though he'd just found something unexpectedly interesting. There was nothing more satisfying than seeing someone once above it all brought down into the dirt, especially someone like Gabriel. "You're just like me now," Anthony said, his voice rising slightly, like excitement, like delight. His hand, cracked with cold sores, settled on Gabriel's shoulder. Though it didn't actually touch the skin, Gabriel felt as if a cold serpent had slithered over his flesh, sending shivers through him instantly. He opened his mouth, wanting to ask, "How could you end up like this? You weren't supposed to be recommended. We're heading off to Anling County for your post? How did you end up here?" But when he looked into Anthony's icy stare and saw his frail, hollow frame, the words died in his throat. "Not the same," Gabriel said softly. "I'm a fugitive now, Anthony. If someone finds out you helped me, then you might be in trouble too." Anthony gave a quiet scoff, a flicker of amusement flashing in his eyes. He leaned closer casually, fingertips brushing Gabriel's shoulder, then suddenly tightened as he reached the collar, yanking it sharply without effort. "Why not hand you over to the authorities right now?" he said calmly. "I'm curious. What kind of deal could one life like yours get me?" His tone was calm and steady, with no particular emphasis, but the final syllable of his sentence lifted ever so slightly. Though his face remained expressionless, there was an unexpected allure in the subtle shifts of his expression and movement. Yet this wasn't a deliberate attempt to draw Gabriel in. It felt more like a barely suppressed tension, as if he were pretending to play a trick. "You won't," Gabriel said firmly, holding his gaze. Anthony paused for a moment, then released him and stood up to straighten his clothes. "I will," he said with a smirk. "If I didn't owe you a favor, I'd have considered using you as proof of loyalty." Gabriel seemed to sense something in those words, his eyes widening in disbelief. "You're planning to? If I were you," he said with a smile, though coldness lingered beneath his eyes. Anthony leaned down and looked at him steadily. "Sometimes I really envy you. You've done so much despite your background." Anthony stopped speaking mid-sentence. His dark eyes flicked around, and instantly his tone returned to normal. "I have a friend. You'll hide in his car at dawn and leave the city. After that, your fate is up to you." Cut. "Let's lock this take first. Take a break, then we'll try a different approach for the next one." The makeup artist came over to touch up Derek's look, but he stood motionless, his shoe tip dragging slowly across the small stones on the ground. Levi pushed himself up from the floor, took a water bottle handed by a crew member, and drank deeply. He glanced sideways toward Derek's direction, sensing that something about his mood tonight just didn't feel right. It wasn't an issue with the performance. Derek still immersed himself quickly, even faster than usual. His expressions and lines were flawless, but that very perfection made Levi uneasy. If he had to describe it, it was almost like a close teammate who'd always been quiet and reserved suddenly shining brightly on the court out of nowhere. But this kind of shift usually meant one thing. Levi suddenly turned his head and stared directly at the director's control booth behind Derek. Mason was unusually serious for once, leaning back in his chair as he patiently explained something to the person beside him. Though young at first glance, the other man carried an innate air of authority that made it hard to ignore. He remembered Mason mentioning casually in the afternoon that a new investor had suddenly decided to visit the set for a personal check-in. "Ah!" Levi pulled his gaze away, studying Derek's face thoughtfully for a few seconds, seemingly guessing what was on his mind. Derek quickly looked up with alert eyes and instinctively started to move as if to run. "Wow, why've you been turning your back all along?" Levi laughed. "So that person who's been bothering you before." Before he could finish speaking, Derek shot back, "No way. Not at all. Don't say it." Even though Derek insisted, Levi kept an eye on the monitor area during the rest of the shoot. The man's gaze never left Derek the entire time, making it hard not to wonder if there was truly something special between them. But since his shy partner didn't want to bring it up, Levi was kind enough not to mention it. Still, as the shoot wrapped up and he watched Derek move mechanically toward the control desk, his teasing glance carried a meaning that was hard to miss. Derek stood behind Mason, keeping a small distance from Edwin. He pretended not to notice the way Edwin turned slightly to look at him, even though that gaze felt unusually intense. He reached up to brush back the hair clinging to his cheek, trying to hide any awkward reaction, then leaned down with deliberate calm as if studying the playback on the monitor. In the shot, Anthony looked just as Derek had imagined. Perfect in posture, appearance, and presence. Mason's expression was relaxed too, suggesting he'd been satisfied with Derek's performance. Derek let out a quiet breath of relief. Then, pretending it was casual, he asked, "Do you think I did okay tonight?" Mason paused mid-tap of his pen, glancing at him with surprise. He almost said, "Why are you asking me? You've been watching the whole time. Can't you tell for yourself?" But before he could say even a single syllable, Derek took a sharp breath and finished the sentence himself. "Did I at least not disappoint Edwin?" Mason froze for a moment, then glanced sharply at him. Only then did he notice that although Derek's eyes were fixed on the monitor screen, his pupils looked unfocused. He turned to look at the new investor beside him and seemed to understand everything in an instant. "Excuse me," Edwin said. "You did a great job." Derek's eyes lit up at the comment. Then he unconsciously pressed his lips together, quickly calming down the smug expression on his face. This was the first time he'd felt such nerves while acting. Despite being stared at by dozens of eyes during every shoot, none had made him feel as tightly wound and uneasy as Edwin's gaze. It was like even a brief glance would send his heart racing and mind unsettled. Derek wasn't sure if it was because Edwin himself was unusually special, or if it was because he'd discovered something he shouldn't have. But either way, his treatment had shifted in a noticeable way. Luckily, Edwin's feedback had been favorable, and Derek gradually relaxed after that. Under Mason's direction, Derek and Levi reshot the scene once more before finally wrapping up for the day. Just as he was about to head to makeup removal, he heard Mason say to Edwin, "I'll have my assistant take Mr. Edwin back to the hotel first. I'll ride with the other actors." Derek paused mid-step, catching Edwin's gaze directly. "No need, Derek seemed to know what he was about to say and instinctively interrupted. "It's fine. Edwin can go back with Mason." Derek wasn't trying to distance himself from Edwin in front of others. He just couldn't shake the strange feeling that it would look odd for the big investor and a minor cast member to be seen leaving together. With so many paparazzi and freelance photographers lurking outside, if someone snapped a photo of them, he could already picture tomorrow's trending headline. He was used to his own turbulent reputation, but didn't want Edwin dragged into it. He gave Edwin a nervous smile and nodded at Mason, then quickly grabbed the hem of his clothes and hurried off before they could respond. By the time Derek finished removing makeup and changed into regular clothes, Edwin had already disappeared. The noisy set had quieted down, with only a few crew members still tidying up equipment. He found Mason talking to the script supervisor, said his goodbyes, and headed toward the cars. Levi, sitting on a nearby beach chair, suddenly tugged at Derek's sleeve, whispering just loud enough for only them to hear. "That gentleman looked unwell when he got into the car." Derek blinked, then after a few seconds, quietly said, "Thanks, my friend, but being too smart can get you in trouble." Levi shrugged casually, then replied in a very exaggerated, overly precise accent, "No worries, wishing you a wonderful evening, my friend," taking his words as good luck. Derek hadn't even settled into the hotel room when he got a message from Edwin. Arrived at the hotel, Derek suddenly sat up straight, clutching his phone on the sofa and thinking for a moment before grabbing a jacket, throwing it on, and heading out toward the top floor. Edwin hadn't expected him to come straight up. His expression showed mild surprise when he opened the door. Derek's eyes quickly scanned the suite, marveling at the thoughtfully designed decor and high-end furnishings. Compared to it, his own room felt like a hastily thrown-together mess, but his astonishment didn't last long. Soon he shifted his attention fully toward Edwin. He'd likely just taken a shower and changed into casual clothes, carrying a faint hint of sandalwood. His hair, once carefully styled during the day, had loosened, with soft strands gently falling across his forehead, making him appear unexpectedly gentle under the warm glow of the hallway lights. Derek couldn't help glancing at him a few times. Still, the look in his eyes remained sharp and clear. His defined facial features instantly brought back that unmistakable edge, silencing any trace of softness. "I saw your message," Derek said, "so I came up. Come in, please." After speaking, Edwin guided his wheelchair back a bit. When he noticed Derek following, he turned and rolled into the room. "I guess you're not too happy." Derek said as he kept pace behind him. Once Edwin's chair stopped by the sofa, Derek also came to a standstill. I figured you'd want an explanation. Edwin turned his head to look at him. Derek gave a small smile, pulling his gaze away from wandering around the room. Honestly, I was also curious about what the top-floor suite actually looks like. He admitted it. He'd never seen something like this before. Just seeing the huge double doors from outside had felt impressive. But Edwin asked, "Why didn't you sit down?" Derek finally moved to the sofa and sank back into it as Edwin turned away to get something. The soreness in his back vanished instantly, and he let out a soft, contented sigh. Why was his own room's couch so much less comfortable? "What would you like to drink? Do you have milk?" "It's too late to drink anything else, I think." "Yes." While Edwin was operating the coffee machine, Derek began to explain, "I wasn't trying to avoid you riding in my car earlier." Edwin looked at him. "There are a lot of people on set, and you're here as an investor. If you actually got into my car, it would look strange no matter how you look at it. I'm worried someone might catch it on camera and write something dramatic about it later. It could cause you trouble." Edwin handed him the warmed milk and asked, "Are you worried I'd be a hassle?" Derek took the glass, dipped his head slightly, and sipped a small amount. Dealing with all these complicated situations can be tricky, especially since James is on vacation. After saying that, he turned to watch Edwin's reaction. Even though he noticed Edwin might be developing feelings beyond what was appropriate, Derek stuck to his principle of doing the job for pay, and never shied away from calming the boss when needed. Edwin stared at him intently for a long time. His expression remained neutral, unreadable, like a quiet, still lake. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I figured it out." For the first time, Derek thought Edwin was actually quite understanding. "That's great," he said softly, finishing the milk in one go. "Since you're not upset with me, I'll head back now." He placed the glass on the coffee table and pretended to stand up, only for Edwin's wheelchair to roll forward slightly, his gaze fixed firmly on him. "Wouldn't you like to stay a bit longer?" "No thanks. The next scene is important, and I haven't memorized my lines yet," Edwin said. "You could just practice here." Derek was about to refuse when he heard Edwin add, "It's probably more comfortable than your room." For some reason, he couldn't help but feel this comment was oddly similar to, "My cat can do backflips. Want to come up and see?" No matter how he listened, it still sounded like there was something hidden behind the words, but he couldn't resist the comfort of the soft sofa and the stunning night view. So after a brief internal struggle, he finally gave in. He had expected Edwin to head back to his room like they usually did at home, leaving the common space for him. But even as Derek brought up the script and tentatively read the first line, Edwin showed no sign of leaving. Instead, he immediately set up his tablet on the nearby table, as if preparing to work. Derek didn't want to move from the sofa, so he just pressed on with his reading. His clear voice echoed through the living room. Soon, the initial sense of unease faded completely. Derek shifted into a more comfortable position, sprawling flat on the sofa, his hands holding the script dangling in midair as he swayed them lightly while staring at the ceiling, delivering Anthony's line to the prince. "Your Highness, my body is nothing special, but since you find it pleasing, I'll gladly surrender it if that's what you wish." After finishing, Derek paused slightly, feeling something just didn't sit right from his understanding of Anthony's character at this moment. The man did have a reckless, take-it-or-leave-it attitude, but he still felt a deep sense of distaste toward the prince showing desire for him. Yet that feeling was quickly overshadowed by ambition. He spoke slowly, with a subtle upward inflection at the end, intentionally provocative, yet hiding a quiet undercurrent of restraint. Just like his usual behavior in the academy, he was always a patient serpent, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, ready to end a target the instant it showed weakness or lost its value. But Derek felt his delivery had been too soft. While the seductive tone came through, there was no hint of restrained intensity or inner cruelty. He tried a few different tones to find the right feel, but none worked. Just as he was about to record several takes and ask Levi for feedback, his chat window suddenly lit up with multiple new messages from William. All were voice notes and images. "Hey, how should I play this scene? When the musician first catches Prince and Anthony together, should I just show pure shock? And for this next part, when Anthony threatens him to keep quiet, is it enough to just obey immediately? Should there be some kind of shift in reaction, like from strong resistance to slowly giving in, and finally being fully convinced? And when he's killed by Anthony, should I just show hatred? Derek really wanted to send him a copy of 100,000 Questions. He used to think William was just naive, but now he actually found him kind of endearing. You should probably ask Mason. He'd be happy to explain it. Reciprocity in action. Derek sent back a voice message. William quickly replied, I helped you tons when you were recording that song last time. You can't be so unfair. Now I'm definitely asking you. Derek paused, catching a glimpse from the corner of his eye as Edwin lifted his eyelids to glance at him. Without hesitation, he quickly searched through his phone for some previously saved performance tips and sent them all over. Go ahead and read these first. Don't be shy. William. Wait, are you seriously making me read academic papers? Derek set down his phone and turned to meet Edwin's inquisitive gaze. He smiled faintly and said, just giving your brother a quick brush off. Edwin lowered his eyes, tracing the messy strands of hair scattered across the couch, then sliding over the smooth forehead and bright eyes before following the line of the nose down to lips that had grown slightly dry from constant talking. His jacket was short, and the sweater underneath shifted upward with his movements. Edwin's gaze flickered, and when he spoke, his voice was unexpectedly rough and unfamiliar to Derek. Finished pretending? Derek caught him staring without warning, as if suddenly pulled into a deep current. Strange. Was the heating too high? Why did just making eye contact make him feel warm? Of course. He looked away, pretending nothing had happened, waved his phone slightly, and tried to keep his tone light, but he seems a little upset now. Instead, Edwin twitched the corner of his mouth and said, That's good then. But Edwin suddenly regretted having left him behind. The room's air conditioning was set to a comfortable temperature, but the warm airflow soon made Derek feel a bit overheated. He shrugged off his jacket and shifted into a new position, lying sideways on the sofa. His sweater, slightly wrinkled from rolling around, lay loosely across his body, its side contour forming a smooth curve. One leg dangled down, kicking idly at his slippers. While his movements were relaxed and carefree, his striking eyes flicked upward sharply. His voice was soft and measured as he recited the lines. Cool like jade, yet when it reached the ear, it felt like a gentle feather brushing against the skin. Edwin lifted the warm water from the table and took a small sip. His throat still felt dry. What are you looking at? Derek's voice was calm, yet carried an unusual hint of restrained intensity, like a deity from the heavens, cold and untouchable. But beneath that solemn presence, there was an unspoken longing, as if gently urging hearts to bow willingly before him. And yet, there was a deeper urge, to pull him down from the clouds and fall together into the depths. He heard Derek say, What are you thinking about again? If not for the script in his hand, Edwin might have believed Derek was talking directly to him, revealing his hidden, unwarranted thoughts. But the script blocked Edwin's intense gaze. Derek remained unaware and continued reciting his lines. My family was poor, and had it not been for Prince's kindness, even with exceptional talent, I would have faded into obscurity, nowhere to shine. Suddenly, my voice softened, carrying a hint of softness and fragility, as if the proud celestial being had fallen from grace, transforming in an instant into a haunting figure wandering through damp, forgotten temples at night. Master musician, he said, can you imagine what it's like when your fingers won't bend? Your hands, so delicate and well-tended. They must be used to playing music, but I once lived on the streets with nowhere to go. I survived by selling paintings and copying letters. The prince once said my hands didn't look like a scholar's. I guess that was when it all began. A man of full stature, who would willingly submit to such a path unless truly desperate. Yet without the prince's protection, I'd have long been lost in poverty and cold alleys. How could I possibly have this chance today? Even for just one chance at survival, I am willing to offer myself. But, master musician, you've never seen me at my lowest. So perhaps you can't understand the despair or helplessness I felt then. Please, master musician, pity my difficult fate. Forget what you've seen today and save Anthony's life. After finishing the lines, Derek shivered involuntarily, his skin prickling all over. Not even the character or the prince could resist being captivated. Derek himself felt utterly entranced by what he was portraying. Thinking of how this unfortunate musician would end up suffering terribly, and then be killed by Anthony's own hand made Derek want to silently mourn for a moment. He tucked the script over his head, muttering the lines to himself a few times, probably because Edwin's room was so cozy and the light was blocked out. He soon felt drowsy and drifted off after lying down for a bit. The faint sounds grew quieter and quieter, eventually turning into long, even breaths. Edwin's gaze shifted from the screen and quickly noticed that Derek had fallen asleep on the sofa. He couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. He maneuvered his wheelchair backward from behind the desk and rolled up to the edge of the sofa. The script covered Derek's entire face, leaving only a small patch of forehead exposed. Edwin glanced over it briefly, then leaned down to pick up the scattered pages on the carpet. He glanced through the scenes casually, but his attention froze when he reached the final passage. His fingers suddenly clenched tightly, leaving a faint mark pressed into the paper. He'd guessed the general plot when Derek read earlier, but seeing it written down now still stirred an undercurrent of unease. Maybe sensing his movement, Derek stirred from his light sleep. He pushed himself up slowly from the sofa, and the script slipped off his face with a soft asterisk thud asterisk. Why's Edwin here? Derek rubbed his eyes, catching sight of the extra page in his hand. Wait, what are you reading? Edwin placed the script gently beside him and asked, "Can I still come to set tomorrow?" Derek thought, "You're basically our biggest lifeline right now. Every crew member who enjoys those fancy meals owes you everything. If I dared say no, they'd all drown me in angry words. Besides, even if I said no, would Edwin really listen?" Derek blinked and replied with a grin, "You've invested so much money. Mason would probably say yes just to let you sit in VIP seats." Edwin stared straight at him, as if not quite satisfied with the answer. Derek let out a sigh, lowering his eyelids slightly. "All right, I do welcome you to come." Edwin's expression seemed to ease just a little. However, Derek shifted slightly, leaning in. "There's one condition." After saying that, he realized how bold he'd sounded. What was that phrase again? Playing on favor. It seemed like he'd unconsciously grown bolder after sensing that Edwin wasn't hostile, and might even have something else in mind. "What?" Edwin asked him. Derek said, "Please don't keep staring at me. I get nervous. Just watch the monitor. After all, Mason has been preparing for this a long time, and the crew's equipment is among the best in the country." "Very clear." Edwin paused briefly, then replied, "All right." Derek yawned and sat blankly on the sofa for another 2 minutes, figuring it was about time to say goodbye to Edwin. But when he reached the door downstairs and had just swiped his access card, a thought flashed through his mind. He quickly grabbed the script page Edwin had just held, staring at it, then suddenly realized what he was seeing. Though only a few lines, it was definitely the scene where Anthony submits to Wyatt. Oh no. He felt like he shouldn't have agreed with Edwin. Just imagining tomorrow's filming setup made him feel uneasy. The actor playing Prince Wyatt is a newcomer, Caleb, a trained stage performer with formal drama school background. His appearance isn't what you'd call conventionally handsome. He doesn't have bold brows or striking eyes. His thin single eyelids and slender, slightly upward slanted eyes give him an unusual, sharp edge. He gained some attention last year for a role in a mystery series where he played a cold and calculating suspect. With his connection to Mason from their school days, he was invited to take on the part of Wyatt. But it has to be said, his presence and look truly match Prince Wyatt. Once dressed in the purple gold brocade robes, he radiated an air of royal authority that commanded attention. Derek had only met him once before, at a scene during academic debate training, and they weren't close. He hadn't expected their second meeting to be this intense and dramatic. As they shook hands, both men briefly locked eyes, each catching a flicker of the same awkward unease in the other's expression. Caleb gave a soft smile and spoke first. "Relax, Derek." Derek offered a faint smile back, but inside he was thinking, "Keep your eyes to yourself. Caleb, you too. Look forward to working together." But in truth, Mason's expectations for this scene were much like what Julian had promised Derek earlier. After all, rising through the long night was a serious political drama. No need for sensational scenes to draw attention. The heart of this scene lay in Anthony's transformation. Driven by ambition, he would stop at nothing to rise higher. The innocent boy once seen in the academy was now gone, and ahead of him remained only a solitary, shadowed path, lying on soft silk curtains. He had never felt more clearly than right now that he could never be like Gabriel. He must climb step by step to the top, no matter the cost. Derek knelt in the prince's study, the chill from the stone floor seeping into his knees. He wore a thin robe, his long hair spilling over his back. His face was bare of makeup, with pale lips, yet still it drew people in, stirring thoughts too private to speak aloud. Last night, after returning to his room, he had discussed a few different approaches with Levi but still wasn't satisfied. He looked toward Caleb seated ahead, already fully immersed in character. The gaze resting on him carried deep emotion. Something like longing, something like excitement, something like eager anticipation. "Anthony has come to give me an answer?" Caleb said with a narrowed smile. "Don't worry, Anthony. Your position and power remain secure, but I've always wanted more. There's something else I'd like from you." Derek felt slightly confused. He wondered, should Anthony feel disdain right now, or pretend to be a willing lamb while secretly despising the prince's naivety beneath his surface calm? He exhaled, then spoke the lines he'd rehearsed with Edwin many times. "Your Highness, my body is nothing special, but if you truly like it, I suppose you may take it." But as soon as the words left his mouth, he still felt something was off. Yet Mason didn't call cut. He had no choice but to press on, and so he grew more and more overwhelmed. Mason's brow furrowed behind the monitor, throwing off not only Derek but even his longtime partner Caleb's performance rhythm completely. Derek couldn't hold back any longer and raised his hand. "Let's pause for a moment." Mason finally gave the signal, speaking with a calm tone. "Your state isn't right. Should I give you a few minutes to reset?" Derek nodded, his eyes flickering toward Edwin sitting beside him before quickly looking away. "I'm just not fully in character. 10 minutes will be enough," Derek said without hesitation. "I'll go over it again." Mason waved his hand, signaling everyone on set to step out, and even Caleb left with understanding. The entire study was left empty except for Derek. He stared blankly around the room, then walked over to the nearby couch and lay down. The coldness surrounding him seeped into his skin as he closed his eyes, mentally retracing every chapter of Anthony's life, from infancy through hard years of study, to the loss of both parents after they clashed with powerful figures, being isolated by noble scholars at the academy, and finally leaving only to learn his assigned post in Anling County had already been taken by a favored official. 10 minutes later, filming resumed. Derek remained kneeling in the same spot. The camera swept across his composed face. Then suddenly, his lowered eyelids lifted sharply, dark eyes locking onto the lens with restrained coldness. Yet the curve of his gaze was faintly smiling. "Are you truly willing?" Prince Wyatt asked, his voice filled with delight. "You saved me from ruin and gave me fine robes and wealth. Whatever my prince desires, I will offer it gladly, naturally including myself." Mason straightened up in front of the monitor, murmuring quietly, "It worked." Edwin sat behind the monitor, his fingers tapping gently and rhythmically on the armrest of his wheelchair. Under Mason's direction, the camera slowly moved forward. The study in the prince's residence felt vast and chilly, sunlight from outside unable to reach inside. The fan caused the thin curtains to sway gently. Faint silhouettes flickered on the screen as golden lamps cast a dim glow, while wisps of smoke curled from an ornate incense burner made of black metal. Anthony knelt on the cold stone floor, his hands gently tracing the fabric of his robe, the hem trailing loosely behind him. Though silence reigned except for the soft whisper of wind, it felt as though countless voices echoed in his ears. Prince Wyatt stood before him, his hands resting gently on Anthony's shoulders. In the midst of inner turmoil, Anthony heard Wyatt's hoarse voice say, "Don't be afraid." Anthony tilted his head up. The shadows on the screen appeared frail and fragile. "I'm not afraid," he murmured softly. "I trust your highness." Wyatt drew him close, unable to hold back. "I'm so happy. Never have I felt this joyful on any day before today." Anthony said nothing. He stared straight into Wyatt's eyes, feeling only mockery. Close up on Anthony, Mason said. The overhead arm slowly descended, watching over Anthony's lowered face like an indifferent eye of fate, silently observing his inescapable descent into sorrow. At this moment, Wyatt had fallen completely asleep, peacefully resting on the inner side. Anthony sat quietly by the edge of the bed, his dark hair spilling over his shoulders, a large robe draped loosely on him, clearly not his own. The candlelight seeped through gaps in the curtains, casting a faint glow across his face and painting half-lit shadows over his form. After a long pause, he slowly raised his head, revealing eyes glistening with moisture. Long lashes carried droplets that slipped from their tips with each soft blink, tracing paths down his pale cheeks and vanishing into the fabric of his robe. His expression remained calm, yet could not hide a fleeting chill in his gaze. Like a serpent finally revealing its fangs, the candlelight flickered in Anthony's pupils, dancing and growing stronger over time until it burned like wild flames, as if ready to consume everything. He stared at Wyatt's throat, his eyes shining with intensity, dark, deep, and profoundly captivating. Idiot, he thought silently. After a long while, he pulled on the unfamiliar robe, stepped down from the bed barefoot, and moved steadily yet lightly toward the door of the study. But as he crossed the threshold, he stumbled awkwardly. Anthony, the maid rushed forward, visibly worried. Anthony waved off the maid's offer of help, gave a slight shake of his head, and stepped into the moonlight. Half an hour later, Anthony changed into fresh clothes and appeared at the capital city's prison complex. The warden was someone Anthony had recently recommended to the prince, so he faced no resistance when entering the prison. Rusted iron bars lined the cells, and the air carried a thick, unpleasant, musty odor. Anthony walked slowly down the dim corridor, each step measured. Luckily, the guards didn't look too closely. Otherwise, they might have noticed his unnatural gait. The prisoners kept their heads lowered, most too afraid to lift their eyes, with fear and despair quietly seeping through the darkness. He didn't pause but continued straight toward the deepest part of the facility. His steps were light as a shadow, making no sound even in still air. He stopped before an iron door and lightly touched its cold bars with his fingertips. "Has he confessed?" Anthony asked coldly. The warden lowered his head and said, "No." Anthony's expression turned icy. He didn't respond right away but slowly stepped into the cell. His footsteps were quiet as a breeze, barely rustling the dry straw beneath his feet. Hearing the voice, the man's eyes fluttered open. Fear and anxiety flooded his stare. He tried to speak but could only let out a faint groan. Anthony casually raised his hand. "Give me the whip." The warden handed it over. Anthony's expression grew even colder, but his hands trembled uncontrollably. Faint candlelight flickered across his eyes, casting a chilling glow that seemed to hint at something dangerous and intense. The camera closed in, his head lifted, as if locking eyes straight through the screen with a haunting intensity. Edwin's breath caught in his throat for a moment, his fingers pausing mid-tap on the armrest as he pressed down hard, his breathing growing heavy. During script reading, Derek and the others discussed it and agreed that Anthony's performance in this scene resembled that of a hunter. On one hand, when he learned the prince had developed an interest in him, he was clearly disdainful, but to gain the power he craved, he had no choice but to play the part of a sacrifice, offering himself to the prince and watching as he slowly fell into a trap Anthony had carefully prepared, feeling smug with victory. But on the other hand, he had been holding back too much around the prince, and needed to release it by exerting control and intense force on those he could dominate in an attempt to fill the growing emptiness within. Yet the more power he gained, the more lost he became. Ultimate authority and a complete disregard for human life ultimately led him down a path of deep distortion. Derek considered himself a relatively mentally healthy person. Roles like Benjamin's could be handled with some personal insight and small talents, but portraying someone as composed yet unhinged as Anthony was far beyond his usual method. Without formal training, Derek usually relied on empathy to step into a character. During the 10-minute break, he immersed himself completely in Anthony's mindset, his own sense of self gradually fading as he shaped himself temporarily into someone else through Anthony's experiences. But such an approach drained him emotionally. By the time Mason called cut, Derek remained utterly still, barely responsive. The set was still caught in the aftermath of his performance. Mason stood behind the monitor, discussing the footage with others. Anthony's scenes had run from morning until night. Everyone present, whether cast or crew, wore signs of exhaustion. Finally, after reviewing the clips twice, Mason said, "Everyone's done great work today. Let's wrap up early and head home to rest." But as soon as he spoke, Derek was already gone. No one could find him anywhere on set. Derek slipped away from everyone's gaze, moving like a shadow into an abandoned set near the filming area. He sat on the stone bridge above the artificial stream, where the water had dried up and was now overgrown with thick weeds. The air felt heavy with Anthony's emotions, making it hard to breathe. He took several deep breaths but still felt short of air. His chest felt tight and blocked, as if something were pressing down on him. While his heartbeat sped up, he felt drained of energy, every nerve stretched taut, mentally and physically worn out. A cold breeze brushed past, carrying a slight dampness, yet his skin felt hot, almost as if burned. He rested his hands in his lap, slumping lazily against the bridge rail, his eyes staring blankly at the empty night sky ahead. A bit nauseous, he wanted to throw up. Good thing he hadn't eaten much tonight, he thought with a quiet sigh. Why does it feel like he's the one who ended up being targeted by that snake? Anthony? He tried to clear his mind, but memories not his own clung to him like an invisible chain around his throat. Then the sound of a wheelchair broke through the wind's steady hum. Derek took 3 seconds to react, then slowly lifted his head. Turning toward the sound, Edwin stood quietly under the moonlight, watching him without saying a word. Derek's heartbeat slowed suddenly. Even the wind brushing past his ear seemed to fade into distance. Sitting on the bridge, he met Edwin's quiet gaze, feeling as though every emotion and tangled thought inside him had been fully exposed. No hiding place left. He gave a weak, tired smile, an attempt that didn't quite reach his eyes, and asked in a soft, sluggish tone, "How did you know I was here?" The wheelchair rolled forward silently and stopped just before him. Edwin pressed down on the armrests, then seemed to realize something, shaking his head slightly with a small hint of regret. "I figured it out. With this studio so big, it wasn't easy to guess," Derek said. Edwin didn't answer right away. He just looked at the drooping eyes and confused expression on Derek's face, then said softly, "Are you tired, or just feeling down?" Derek shook his head and said, "A little tired. Feels like something's stuck in my chest. Can't seem to settle." He paused after speaking, as if not used to showing vulnerability in front of others, then added with a brighter tone, "But I guess the performance was decent. I saw you watching for quite a while." Edwin let out a soft sigh and reached out to gently rest his hand on Derek's shoulder, silently holding eye contact. The next moment, Derek stiffened, unexpectedly pulled into an embrace. Derek's chin rested on Edwin's shoulder as he blinked slowly. Dazed and quiet, the fabric touching his skin felt soft and comfortable. He couldn't help taking in a deep breath. The gentle scent of white tea drifted into his nose, clearing the fog in his mind as if everything suddenly made sense. Moonlight slipped through the gaps in dry branches, casting soft light over both of them. In the quiet stillness of night, Edwin's warm presence soothed Derek completely. It felt like there was nowhere safer or more comforting than being right here in this embrace. Edwin's embrace felt incredibly warm. Derek felt all the scattered thoughts in his head melt away instantly. Without meaning to, he shut his eyes. The faint sound of wind reached him, muffled, as if through a thick layer of cloth. The night grew deep and calm. Time seemed to pause. Derek relaxed entirely, like a balloon drifting aimlessly in the air, finally coming back down to earth. All he could truly feel now was the softness against his face and Edwin's faint fragrance lingering nearby. His heartbeat slowed gradually, and his breathing became easier. Derek found himself drifting in thought. No wonder some say a hug can be even more moving than holding hands or kissing. Two hearts pressed close, chests almost merging as if sharing warmth and breath, their rhythms sinking slowly, like bodies blending into one another in comfort so deep it's addictive. He exhaled a soft, quiet breath. His eyes filled with something unclear, whether sweat or tears, shining brightly. The flush beneath his eyes was even more vivid than during filming. "Thank you for the comfort," Derek said, his chin resting on Edwin's shoulder, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Noticing the shift in him, Edwin gently brushed a few strands of hair at the back of Derek's head before loosening his grip around his back. Derek pulled away from the embrace and turned slightly to rub his face, wiping away traces of moisture from his eyes. "Shall we head back?" Edwin asked. Derek nodded, his expression softening as if coming back to himself. Now feeling a little shy about meeting Edwin's gaze, his hair fell over most of his face, but Edwin still caught the faint flush on his cheeks under the dim moonlight. He let out a quiet chuckle and leaned in slightly. "Want to come by my place?" Derek's mind went blank for a second. Something about this felt off. They'd only just shared that tender moment. How did things suddenly shift so fast, racing into something he hadn't even imagined? Edwin smoothed down Derek's messy hair and gave him a look full of playful warmth, almost as if reading his thoughts. "Just grabbing some food," he explained. Derek felt heat rise to his cheeks. The calm he'd managed to settle back in starting to ripple again. To be honest, Derek didn't really mind going to Edwin's room. He dragged out the word, paused for a moment, then finally agreed. Seeing that, Edwin reached over and pulled Derek's loosely hanging coat. "Let's go." On the way back, he'd already arranged for food to be prepared in his room. As they stepped inside, a rich aroma instantly filled the air, mingling with a hint of wine. Soft lamps cast warm golden glows across the space, and a variety of colorful, appetizing little dishes were neatly laid out on the coffee table in front. Derek walked halfway around the sofa before settling into a spot. Noticing Edwin move the wine aside, he asked, "What would you like to drink?" Looking at the wine in Edwin's hand, Derek said, "Actually, drinking is fine." He wasn't against alcohol. He just disliked formal drinking rituals. Back in college, he'd often visited a stand on the sports field where students from another major sold cocktails. He became so familiar with it that they practically treated him like their regular guest. For a while, his mom would panic every time she called. She'd open video chat and find him holding a clear glass, sipping what looked just like milk tea, worrying he might turn into someone too caught up in drinking. Later, when those friends gave up drinking, Derek followed suit and quit too. He glanced over at the bar behind Edwin, where whiskeys and white rum were still sitting out, and suddenly had a different idea. "Maybe I'll mix a drink for Edwin." Edwin raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You know how to do that?" Derek hesitated. "I think so. Besides, drinking himself wouldn't hurt anyone. Worst case, he might get Edwin a little unsteady, but that's not such a big deal." He pulled out his phone to look up the prices of various spirits and immediately started mixing on his own. The suite had everything. Most common ingredients for signature drinks were easy to find. After making 1 Cuba Libre, Derek took a small sip and thought it tasted pretty good, so he happily went on to make the next one. Edwin picked up an orange from the tray, calmly peeled it beside Derek, and held it out toward him. Derek was focused on the screen showing drink ratios. Both hands were full. When Edwin suddenly did that, he didn't react right away and thought it was meant for him, so he leaned forward and gently took a segment with his lips. Edwin's eyelids dropped slightly as he glanced at his still raised fingers, then kept staring at Derek's lower lip without speaking. Derek paused mid-pour. Only after a moment did he realize what he'd done. His face instantly flushed, his eyes darted around nervously, wanting to check Edwin's reaction but also avoiding it. Edwin let out a quiet laugh. "I was going to use that one for mixing your drink." Derek bit down on the orange slice, too embarrassed to say anything. Flustered, he sloshed the drink into the measuring cup, then grabbed the freshly peeled orange segment Edwin handed him and tossed it into the plastic glass. He gripped the muddler with full force, almost as if trying to take out his frustration on this poor fruit's twin. Edwin watched everything silently from nearby, being thoughtful enough not to interrupt. He turned on the living room projector and started playing a movie at random. Only after Derek had finished playing around did he finally bring his creation to the couch. But thanks to what just happened, all his earlier ideas had completely slipped away. He buried his head in the food and started eating mindlessly, not glancing at the screen for even a second, completely unaware of what was being said on the soundtrack. The drinks at the bar were quite strong. Derek's cheeks soon warmed up, and since he'd made more than 2, after finishing one he reached for the next right away. Edwin had barely finished half his drink when he saw Derek down the second one in one go. He couldn't help but speak up. "You'll get drunk if you keep this up." Derek held onto his glass and gave him a quiet, distant look. He curled into the corner of the sofa, having taken off his jacket. A fluffy blanket covered his lower half. The alcohol had started to take effect. His eyes were hazy, with a soft sheen over dark pupils that looked unusually moist. He looked a bit like a deer caught in the forest by a stranger, uncertain and still. "But I'm still completely clear-headed right now," he said. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Edwin's eyes. He didn't rush to reply, instead gently rolling his wheelchair closer. His gaze drifted toward the window, as if deep in thought. The movie still played on, but Derek hadn't caught a single line of dialogue. The faint silence in the air made him feel uneasy. He lowered his head and quietly traced the rim of his glass. Edwin took a small sip from the drink he'd prepared. It was sweet, with a hint of fruit, not quite to his taste. A faint glimmer of liquid clung to his lips, As he lifted his eyes, he saw Derek set down the glass and reach for another. "Take it easy," he said, gently pushing the cup downward with one hand. "If you really get drunk, I won't be able to get you home." Derek lifted his eyelids and glanced at him, noticing that Edwin had somehow moved a little closer without meaning to. Instinctively, he shifted back into the corner of the sofa. The glass remained tightly gripped in his hand. Derek tried to say something, but a slight dizziness washed over him, feeling like he couldn't get enough air. His breathing quickening slightly, the warmth from the alcohol spread through his body, creating a lightheaded, floating sensation, as if the sofa beneath him had turned into soft clouds, cradling him gently, perhaps because Derek's dazed eyes and flushed face looked just like someone who'd had too much to drink. Edwin felt a sudden urge to tease. He asked with a quiet smirk, "Don't you like me getting close?" Derek stared straight ahead, his mind buzzing. His thoughts were still sharp, but his blood seemed restless under the influence of alcohol. Swirling with a flood of feelings, Edwin tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over the flushed skin on Levi's cheeks before settling on his eyes, which glowed like amber in the flickering light. "What are you thinking?" The rush of blood to his head made it impossible for Levi to keep up the act, and without a moment's hesitation, he blurted out, "I was wondering, do you like me, Edwin?" He held onto his glass, still sitting cross-legged, meeting Edwin's eyes with a clear, steady look. The shifting shadows danced across their faces, and in his gaze it was hard to tell whether worry or curiosity had the upper hand. After a pause, Edwin said with a half-smile, "You're just realizing that now?" It was as if time had been frozen. The first moment Derek truly couldn't hear anything at all, like being swept up in a powerful current. Every sense of reason and logic vanished. His mind flashed with scenes from the very night he arrived in this world to the kiss they'd shared later that evening. He wanted to ask, "Were you really intentional that day?" And he also wondered, when exactly did it start? But in the end, only a dry, "Why?" came out. Edwin stared straight at him and asked in return, "Then what about you? Why are you asking this?" "I don't know." Derek lowered his head, staring fixedly into his drink. His fingers nervously rubbed the rim of the glass. Confused, why did it feel like he was now the one being asked, not the one who'd been confessed to? "It's just, the mood has built up this far. You really should say something." He glanced at Edwin with a slightly dazed look. "I'd suspected it before, but now that I've confirmed it, well, it's kind of..." Realizing he was rambling again, Derek quickly shut his mouth, unsure how to recover. Edwin had already guessed what he was thinking. His expression darkened slightly, yet he still asked, "So you want to turn me down, is that right?" Derek froze. He understood Edwin's feelings now, but hadn't yet sorted out his own. Caught off guard by the sudden question, he didn't have time to respond, but he still, very much so, wanted to leave after their agreement ended. He glanced at Edwin's leg, recalling the dream he'd had earlier, one that seemed to hint at the original owner's fate. After a long silence, he cautiously said, "If I refuse, will our agreement still hold?" He felt like a terrible person. It was him who brought up the matter in the first place, yet he couldn't bring himself to give the answer the other wanted. Not getting a reply from Edwin, he softened his voice and whispered, "Or could I have a little more time to think?" But as soon as he said it, he felt like he was just making excuses, trying to stall until the agreement ended so he could leave without consequence. "You don't need to rush giving me an answer." Seeming to sense Derek's unease, Edwin let out a soft sigh and gently took his hand. "I won't push for change. You can take your time thinking." Considering the time before they met, he'd already waited a long while, and wasn't worried about waiting just a little longer. Break time. Derek rolled up his sleeves and pant legs. Sitting on the palace steps in a daze, William sat at the center of the grand hall, surrounded by Mason and others, his fingers moving smoothly over the strings of the zhonghuan. The clear, bright notes flowed out with ease and freedom, filling the space. In a way, William truly fit the role of musician, saving Mason from having to hire another professional player for the background music. But Derek had no time to enjoy his gentle playing. His face was drawn with worry as he stared off toward the exit, sighing for the 5th time in a minute. "What's wrong?" Levi asked, waving his script near Derek before sitting beside him. "You were doing great just now," weren't you? Derek shook his head. Maybe it was because he'd exposed Edwin's feelings the night before, making him act with no restraint afterward. Derek had just woken up when he received a private RV. Jack nearby was grinning from ear to ear, finally free from driving duties, but immediately realized who was behind it, letting out a long sigh of despair over the rest of his life. And just when Edwin wasn't enough, as he nervously arrived on set, he got handed a scarf delivered by Austin's assistant. It was said to be a gift from the brand, but when Derek checked the price, he nearly dropped his coffee, startled out of his hands. Derek, this is too generous. I can't accept it. Austin, I don't wear scarves, so keeping it would just be a waste. Derek thought to himself, then what was around your neck the day you came to set? Austin, I gave one to my parents and grandmother too. Mom and grandma specifically asked if there was one for you. If you return it, I won't know how to explain. Derek didn't know what to say. He felt like everyone had somehow agreed to disrupt his focus on purpose. The sound of the zhongyuan stopped, and Mason seemed to whisper something to William before returning to the control booth. William casually glanced around the hall, put down the instrument, then sauntered over toward them. Derek lifted his eyelids slightly and gave him a quiet look, the tall figure casting a long shadow that wrapped completely around him. He shifted uneasily to the side. You're blocking my view. William rolled his eyes. Even if I weren't in your way, sitting all the way back here, what exactly would you see? Derek shot back. Mind your own business. William paused. Did you eat fireworks today? Derek thought, I haven't actually eaten any. But honestly, he wished he could just be set off like one. Levi's gaze swept over the two of them before smiling at William. Did Mason finish your coaching? Why'd you come over? Finished. He asked me to spend more time with all of you. William pulled out his script, tapped it lightly on his palm, then sat down beside Derek, leaning forward slightly, one hand resting on his thigh and the other propped under his chin. He gave Derek a half smile. I've read through all those documents you sent me earlier. Derek raised an eyebrow, as if silently asking, so what? I don't get it, William said with no hint of shame, speaking with complete confidence. Can you explain it to me? Derek turned his head slightly and gave him a quiet, distant look. A second later, he quickly looked away, just seeing those eyes, so strikingly like Edwin's. He felt a wave of irritation. Can you even do this? Teach me, please. William wrinkled his nose, his tone edged with impatience. But now that he looked at him closely, it wasn't quite the same. Edwin was usually as cold and distant as a block of ice. His gaze sharp like a wolf's, even when he relaxed and showed warmth, felt like a still lake surface, perhaps shimmering occasionally with soft ripples, but impossible for others to fathom the depth beneath. But William was quite different. Normally, he acted like a hyperactive husky, wild and full of energy. His handsome features only made him look more annoyingly playful. Right now, pretending to be sweet and obedient, he looked just like his golden retriever, Big Pancake. Lovable, clumsy, and overly eager. Thinking of that, Derek couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth and let out a quiet laugh. What are you laughing at? William widened his eyes, glancing at him suspiciously. Back in my studio, you sang that simple tune like it was winding through mountain roads. It wasn't even funny then. Why now? Derek glanced back at Levi, who had already shifted slightly aside, pretending to focus on the script while casually peeking their way, always eager to watch others' drama. Derek muttered under his breath. Levi smiled and gave him a subtle look toward the outside, where several crew members were huddled in a corner, quietly watching them. Their mouths moved as they whispered, faces animated, clearly gossiping about something juicy. Derek didn't even need to think. He already knew the subject of their chatter had to be him and William. He paused for a moment, then suddenly came up with a mischievous idea. Leaning sideways, he propped his head up, pretending to be deeply interested as he carefully studied William from head to toe. William didn't understand what he was doing and just stood frozen in place. By the time William's expression shifted from confusion to uncertainty and then to discomfort, Derek finally spoke with a playful tone. Don't you worry about people talking behind your back if you're always sticking close to me? William asked right away. What could they possibly say? Derek pretended to think deeply for a moment before asking in return. What do you think? He took a deep breath and began making up a story with serious intent. Like how you used to ignore me, but now I've got you completely wrapped around my finger. You even went out of your way just to join the project for me, willing to take on a role that might only show up for 5 minutes in the final cut. It's obvious. Derek leaned forward slightly, but stopped just at an appropriate social distance. That you're really into me. William fell silent. He sat frozen on the steps, his mind going blank for 10 seconds. Derek found the reaction amusing at first, but then remembered that William was actually a year younger than the original owner of this body, meaning he was 3 years younger than him. Teasing someone so young didn't really match his usual style. He cleared his throat lightly and stepped back a bit. So, William suddenly stood up. He glared at Derek fiercely, then turned around and started walking away quickly. But after taking just a few steps, he seemed to think of something and turned back. Fine, don't teach me anything. What's the point in saying all that nonsense? Is it really entertaining? William said sharply, then tossed something into Derek's arms. Just something I picked up randomly. Take it or leave it. Derek pulled the item from his arms and studied it carefully, briefly stunned by its unusual shape, then asked with a puzzled look, "Is this some kind of flying bug?" "It's a CD player," William said through gritted teeth. Derek almost wondered if the three of them had planned it together. How come they all gave gifts on the same day? Watching William's angry retreat, Derek slowly exchanged a glance with Levi inside. He really is someone who sets off easily, kind of fun to watch. Levi stared at him for a few seconds, then covered his mouth and let out a quiet giggle. Derek looked puzzled. "What's wrong? You really are quite slow," Levi said with a smile, his eyes sparkling. "It's quite amusing." Derek wore an expression of confusion, but he had accepted William's gift after all, though it seemed utterly impractical. More like a surreal ornament than anything useful. He still went to find William after filming ended. He found a quiet spot, sat down casually, and immediately pulled out the script to start rehearsing on the spot. It had to be said that William's ability to grasp acting far surpassed Derek's talent in singing. As soon as they exchanged a few lines, William was already fully immersed. The two of them spent dozens of minutes going over their lines by the flower beds near the set. Seeing how well it went, Derek left satisfied after wrapping up his session. Yet, this scene of the two of them crouching to rehearse was still captured by a paparazzo standing hundreds of meters away. And that same night, it soared to the top of Weibo's trending topics. Teacher, shouldn't William be a refined aristocrat from the X Circle? Why is he crouched by the flower bed holding his coat like some street performer? Passing crew members even had to ask, "Are you two here to use the restroom?" Thanks for the reply. After 20 years of life, I never thought I'd witness such a harmonious duo in one frame. It feels surreal, but let's be honest, Derek looks stunning in that outfit. He's like a white crane floating through the air. Friends, don't get fooled. According to insiders on set, William's character will be brutally silenced by Derek later on. Anthony is known for killing without hesitation. Definitely not a crane, but a venomous snake. Does anyone know lip reading? I'm dying to know what they were saying over there. Breaking news. It seems William asked Derek to help him with acting, and Derek was coaching him on lines. One theory suggests Derek said, "Maestro, you're not developing any inappropriate feelings toward me, are you? That wouldn't be wise." Then William replied, "Anthony misunderstood. I never," but the clip only showed part of it. The full scene actually includes Derek using a white ribbon to end William's life. Though intense, there's no denying how striking he looked. Such a niche moment. If not for recognizing these two faces tied to so much drama, I might have actually shipped them. Oh, by the way, will the Blue Bird be wrapping up soon? Yes. And it's said that the Blue Bird has been nominated for several awards at the upcoming Jinmong Television Arts Festival. Can't wait. Derek also received an invitation to the Jinmong Television Arts Festival, and even Julian landed him a collaboration with a luxury brand. Compared to his first time walking the red carpet last year, his treatment this year has improved dramatically. Most of it is thanks to the Blue Bird going viral and gaining widespread attention. His commercial value has risen sharply. As Julian put it, brands eager to work with him have already lined up like they're waiting for love tickets. If Derek had even a little ambition, his commercial value this year would definitely reach its peak. Unfortunately, Derek's only focus right now is on taking a break. Still, Derek isn't paying much attention to what's happening around him. His mind these days feels like it has just two things on it: one dedicated to filming wind rising through the long night, and the other focused on his relationship with Edwin. But since that night, Derek hasn't seen Edwin again. He didn't feel comfortable sending a message to ask, so he quietly tried asking hotel staff instead, and found out Edwin had finished his vacation and already returned to city. All that was left behind was a full-sized plush bear. When Derek saw the bear being brought into his room, he was slightly surprised. It wasn't until he buried his face in its soft front and caught a whiff of sweet strawberry scent that he finally understood why Edwin had left it behind. He immediately turned bright red. Still, the plush bear ended up settling in on his bed. At night, when he'd press his face into the bear's soft belly, he'd think, Edwin is actually very thoughtful. Even though Derek's words came across as a near rejection, Edwin didn't say anything at all. Yet all the emotional stress seemed to have fallen entirely on him. Time passed quickly on set, and before long, it was the day of the Jinmong Television Arts Festival. The festival is also held in City A, and Derek hadn't mentally prepared to return to his apartment, so he asked Jack to book a same-day round-trip ticket, planning to pull off one of those last-minute rush schedules. But unexpectedly, on the evening after the festival ended, Derek still ended up staying overnight at Edwin's apartment. The Jinmong Award Selection and Ceremony are the centerpiece of the Jinmong Television Arts Festival. Since they combine professional judges with public voting, it is considered one of the most authoritative and influential awards in the industry. Derek's team placed great importance on this exposure, not only because the red carpet beforehand was packed with famous names and filled with photographers from all angles, but also because the festival organizers had already announced the nominees 3 days prior. Derek's portrayal of Benjamin was prominently featured. Bluebird went viral in a major way, and its popularity peaked right after last week's finale aired. It stayed on top of trending topics for 3 days straight, with endless discussions and fan creations flooding social media platforms. Benjamin's standout moments quickly became internet sensations, earning praise as one of the most emotionally resonant characters of the year. On major video websites, there were countless analyses of Bluebird's plot structure, in-depth discussions about Derek's performance, and insightful breakdowns on how the fantasy ensemble was crafted. Several of Derek's top fans rushed to enter giveaways to celebrate. The once silent support group, dormant for over a year, suddenly welcomed countless new members. An hour before the ceremony began, while fans were nervously anxious, Derek remained calm, almost serenely so. "Please let me know if Derek can win tonight." In the makeup room, Jack clasped his hands together and shook 3 coins repeatedly. The clinking sounds echoed several times across the wooden table. "You're even more nervous than I am," Derek said casually as he let the stylist work on his red carpet look. "I guess all of Emma's hopes for me to become driven in my career somehow ended up in you." Jack fiddled with the coins on the floor and entered 6 heads into a traditional divination chart. "But Derek, your performance in Bluebird was truly excellent. Just being a runner-up would be such a shame," Jack said, then sent the divination result to a contact named Master E in his phone. Derek glanced at him with curiosity. "Do you actually believe your readings are accurate?" "Absolutely." Jack nodded vigorously. "My roommate asked for help finding a lost cat, and he really did track it down. So impressive?" Derek suddenly felt tempted to ask him about his love life, but quickly pushed the thought aside. Then, half a minute later, Jack let out a loud, painful groan. The stylist was in the middle of curling one side of Derek's hair. He pushed aside his fringe and asked lazily, "What happened?" "Looks like it's not going to happen?" Jack nodded solemnly, face full of despair. He said the chances were extremely slim. "I'm so upset." Derek brushed it off. "I'm not only living for today, I'll have many more chances in the future if this one doesn't work out." The moment he spoke, he froze for a brief second. Help, how could he have such a reckless thought? "Yeah, I think wind rising through the night has a great chance too." But the bright-eyed college student instantly perked up at his words. Derek forced a thin smile, his lips twitching slightly, wishing he could take back what he'd just said. "You'd better check if I can make it to Luna's team's celebration dinner tonight, just like the previous Aurora red carpet event for their th anniversary." This time the Bluebird cast walked the red carpet to Geth. The flashes from cameras were so intense it was nearly impossible to keep one's eyes open. One cast after another stepped onto the red carpet, and when the host's microphone finally announced the Bluebird cast, the crowd erupted into wild cheers. The group moved forward in a grand procession, all dressed in elegant attire. Oliver led the way, holding Ava's hand, while Austin and Charlotte trailed half a step behind. Derek followed closely behind, wearing an olive green haute couture suit with shiny white shoes. His jacket was only fastened at one button, and beneath the open collar, a patterned shirt could be faintly seen. His bangs had been trimmed slightly by the stylist, and he wore a short ponytail at the back, secured with a sleek black hairpin. Anyone paying close attention might notice that the shape of this pin matched Benjamin's sword hilt exactly. Why does it feel so oddly unsettling even though everything's completely covered? Could it be because I've been watching too many late-night Nightmare Demon videos lately? You're not alone, sister above. I just looked into Derek's outfit. It seems to be a new GR released this year. The original design had open work from the shoulder blades down to the lower back, with silver chains wrapped all over. Probably because of the occasion, they modified it and covered everything up. Sorry, but I can't help laughing. This is actually kind of funny. The Bluebird is seriously trending. Since they stepped onto the red carpet, live stream viewers have been skyrocketing. Insanely impressive. My love, my beautiful Nightmare Demon wife. Benjamin fan club now claiming our throne. So handsome, my husband. So stunning, my husband. The roar of the crowd poured in like a wave. Derek raised his hand to wave at the fans, and upon hearing the enthusiastic cheers, he gave a soft smile. Julian had rehearsed the red carpet interview with Derek once before. No matter what the host asked, Derek responded flawlessly. Compared to the others in the cast who seemed eager and restless, he was unnervingly calm. It was as if he'd come here just to take a break, especially when they took their seats inside. The camera swept over both his and Austin's faces, one seeming focused but clearly uninterested, the other appearing calm but visibly tense, as if clenching his jaw in quiet stress. Derek turned slightly, letting out a soft laugh before pulling a candy from his pocket and offering it to Austin. "Don't worry," he said with a reassuring smile. "It'll be over in the blink of an eye." Austin let out a quiet chuckle. "What's that all about? Tell me what you're chewing on. They look so good together." No wonder they're the two main faces of our asterisk create youth asterisk. After they posed for that magazine cover, I somehow ended up getting emotionally attached again. At 8 o'clock sharp, the award ceremony officially began. As expected by fans online, Best Director and Best Screenwriter went without surprise to the asterisk Bluebird asterisk team. When Ava stepped up to accept her award, tears streamed down her face. The writing once hailed as flawless by readers now condensed into just 2 lines. "Thank you, Luna. Thank you to every member of the crew. And thank you to the characters I poured my heart and soul into creating." Derek was starting to feel tired from sitting so long, but the camera kept lingering on him. He had no choice but to lean back slightly while keeping his posture perfectly composed. The event continued forward, and after the mid-show performance, it finally reached the Actor Awards segment. Next up, immediately revealing the winner of Best Supporting Actor, the host announced, "The nominees are..." The camera panned across each actor as their name was called. The host paused, then spoke slowly and clearly. Asterisk Bluebird asterisk. Derek. The camera lingered on Derek's calm expression, as if the surrounding applause didn't reach him at all. But in the next moment, the screen flashed with a short film submitted for review. Derek blinked once. His perfectly composed face throughout the evening finally cracked ever so slightly. There was only one reason. The submitted clip showed Benjamin's farewell moment. No loud cries, no dramatic outbursts. Just quiet dignity as he said goodbye to his parents before moving forward with unwavering resolve toward a fate he'd long known. He looked back once more at Sia Mansion, his eyes shimmering like starlight on still water, then stepped without hesitation into what was to come. Benjamin turned back one last time to look at Sia Mansion, his eyes trembling with a quiet depth like a starlit lake. Then he moved forward without hesitation or regret. Just got emotionally shattered this afternoon, and now they're doing it again tonight. Seriously, when you combine this moment with Derek's earlier analysis of Benjamin, it hits even harder. Please, the best supporting actor has to be our white moonlight brother. Otherwise, I'll never get over it. The award presenter opened the winners list with a subtle smile curling at the corner of his lips. The recipient of the Golden Ray Award for Best Supporting Actor is. His voice trailed off slightly, pausing deliberately for 2 seconds as he scanned the crowd. Who is it? Stop teasing us. I'm on edge. Please. It has to be our fish. The camera lingered on Derek's face. He seemed to sense something, lifting his eyes just slightly, as if indifferent to the pause, yet holding his breath in quiet anticipation. But then the presenter shifted focus and announced another actor's name, Ning-yi from Crossing the Mountain Pass. The live chat fell silent for a few seconds. Then Derek's fans erupted in collective sorrow, bursting like a pierced balloon. No, it hurts a bit, but I expected this. Crossing the Mountain Pass was the best rural drama I saw last year. He truly earned it. The Derek fan group had already prepared for this. It's okay, we're managing, except for Derek. Other actors, super chats, seem to have already started crying, from being hated online to just getting a nomination. He's already done amazing. I'm not asking for more now. The camera swept across the faces of all nominees. Some hidden disappointment, some surprise, others forced calm smiles. But when it reached Derek, he simply blinked lightly and wiped away a single tear from his cheek, still moved by his own performance. By the time the ceremony ended, the Bird of Jade crew had won 3 television awards in individual categories. Derek and Austin were both nominated for Best Supporting Actor and Best Lead Actor, but ultimately fell just short. Still, no award didn't mean no celebration. After the event wrapped up, Derek, accompanied by Jack, cheerfully comforted the heartbroken fans waiting outside, then dragged his downcast friend Austin toward the banquet hall. It's okay, little brother, you're still young. There will be plenty of chances in the future. It's not like you'll only ever make this one show. Austin glanced at him and asked, You don't seem to feel anything at all. Honestly, there was something, Derek said, taking a slow sip of his drink. The moment I saw the short film, my mind was just filled with 6 words. Austin raised an eyebrow. What? Derek looked around cautiously, leaned in closer, and whispered the 6 words. More than half of them were censored. Austin suppressed a smile, then paused thoughtfully before asking, So if that's how you felt, wouldn't not winning make it even more disappointing? Derek rested his chin on his hand and said, But being great is just a fact. I don't need an award to prove it. Sure, I'd be happy if I won, but not winning isn't the end of the world. Next time for sure. And think about it, if you actually won the prize, you'd be the one paying double the red envelope tonight. He even shook his red envelope for emphasis. Austin's sense of disappointment seemed to melt away after hearing those words. Oliver quickly spotted the two quietly chatting in the corner and led a group of staff over to them. Derek, you and John aren't hiding here crying, are you? Someone rested a hand on his shoulder. Derek took another slow sip of wine, eyes crinkling with amusement. I didn't cry at all. Why don't you check on Austin instead? Nonsense. I clearly saw your tears when the winners were announced. Derek leaned back lazily. Can't a guy get moved by his own performance? Benjamin's story had ended, but Derek's journey was far from over. Maybe it was the alcohol hitting him. Derek mused drowsily. Oliver and Ava were surrounded by a crowd, everyone drinking and eating heartily. Amidst the cheerful chaos, Derek accidentally drank too much. Austin didn't trust Jack to handle Derek alone, so he joined him on the ride back. Guess this is the building. I don't come up here often, Jack said, watching the floor numbers rise on the elevator display. I was supposed to head back after the celebration party. Austin asked, Why so rushed? Derek said so. No scene scheduled for tomorrow. I'm not sure why he's in such a hurry. The elevator chimed softly, and as Jack just leaned out to take a look at the hallway layout, he noticed only one door across the way was open, with someone sitting inside. Is he drunk? Edwin asked quietly. His eyes flicked over the hand Austin had supporting Derek, his expression darkening slightly as he said coldly and distantly, I'll take him from here. Thank you for bringing him back. Jack froze for a moment, instinctively glancing at Austin. Austin, on the other hand, remained completely calm. He gently adjusted Derek's slumped body on his shoulder and gave a slight nod. Mr. Edwin, do you need help with him? Edwin's wheelchair had stopped just beside the doorway. He said nothing but reached out lightly to touch Derek's wrist, as if testing. Derek lay sprawled across Austin's shoulder, murmuring drowsily, Not there yet. Want to sleep. Edwin's expression darkened visibly, and Jack couldn't help shivering inwardly, wondering how someone could carry such a heavy presence. Austin remained completely composed. He lifted Derek off his shoulder and handed him over to Edwin's care. "I'll leave him in your hands, though he may need to return to the set tomorrow, Mr. Edwin might want to wake him early." Edwin glanced up at him with half-lidded eyes and replied coolly, "Thank you for the heads up." Austin gave a quiet pulled his gaze away, then turned slowly. He placed a hand on Jack's shoulder to signal him to follow before walking into the elevator without looking back. Just as the elevator doors began closing, Jack stole a quick glance. Edwin was gripping Derek's wrist and using one shoulder to support his weight, face unreadable. Once the elevator started moving down, Jack couldn't help but ask, "Is Edwin okay? I'm worried about Derek's condition. Might he need more care?" After getting drunk, Derek fell asleep as soon as he got in the car. Even though he said that Jack had no real idea where else to take him, he muttered something halfway through, but Jack only caught the words "home." The rest was completely unclear. Austin's gaze dropped. After a long pause, he finally said, "Check the time tomorrow morning and give him a call. Don't let it slow down production." "Got it." Edwin adjusted the direction of his wheelchair and said, "I'll escort you back to your room." Derek acted as if he hadn't heard, staring intently at him for several seconds before gently poking his cheek. "Why are you frowning?" Edwin's expression darkened further. He pulled Derek's hand away from his face and asked, "Why did you drink so much tonight?" Derek rested his forehead against Edwin's shoulder, eyes wandering slightly. "Tonight is the Golden Ray Awards ceremony. Luna and the others were excited, invited us to dinner, and I was happy too." Then his upper body slumped again, and he collapsed entirely into Edwin's arms. "But I don't know why. I feel kind of empty." Derek's voice was slow and drawn out. "At first, I didn't really care. But after seeing my short film shown on screen, I started to feel like maybe it was actually deserved, even though The Blue Bird was my very first project. And the filming process was tough. I really hate work and overtime, but after seeing the final cut, I realized I liked this character more than I expected. He deserves this honor." Edwin watched him quietly, then gently brushed the tips of his hair. "You deserve this honor too. It's just kind of a pity." Derek mumbled vaguely, "There will be more." Edwin gently patted his back and said softly, "As long as you're willing to keep going, there'll be even greater moments of honor for you in the future." Derek stared up dazedly, eyes misty, as if he understood but also didn't quite grasp. His lips twitched, then stretched into a sideways smile, bright and vivid like a tipsy little fox. "Really? You think that highly of me?" he said playfully. Edwin spoke with rare honesty. "Yeah, I like watching you act." Derek hung limply against him, still as a sloth, his unfocused eyes blinking slowly, lost in thoughts no one else could read. Edwin felt the person on him finally settle down slightly and let out a quiet breath. He guided the wheelchair forward again. Though his view was blocked for a moment, after several tries, they finally reached the bedroom door. He glanced sideways at Derek still clinging to him and spoke softly. "We're here. Can you lie down on your own?" Derek didn't move, just let out a soft hum with his eyes closed, curling himself closer to Edwin's chest and muttering faintly, "Don't want to." Edwin sighed slightly, lifted his hand to steady the wheelchair, and gently pulled Derek's leg back toward him. "You don't have to like it. You still need to move. You can't stay on me forever." Derek half opened his eyes, stared blankly at him for a few seconds, then grinned again. "Can't I just keep sitting like this?" Edwin lightly played with the ends of his hair and said teasingly, "Never thought you'd turn into such a troublemaker when drunk." Upon hearing that, Derek pouted softly, looked up at him with an offended expression, but still kept his hand hooked on Edwin's shoulder, clearly unwilling to let go. He blurted out without context, "So you won't hold me if I'm not in a good mood?" Edwin looked at him, his tongue unconsciously brushing against the back of his teeth. "You like me holding you?" he asked in a low voice. Derek hesitated for a moment, as if trying to understand the question. After half a minute, he slowly nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "Edwin's arms are so cozy and warm." Derek buried his head into Edwin's shirt, his voice muffled and soft. After a pause, he added quietly, It feels completely different with you. Edwin froze for a moment. He looked down at the small tuft of hair at the back of Derek's head and gently pulled out the hairpin, holding it up. The rubber band came loose too, letting Derek's medium-length hair spill over his shoulders. "I won't always be like this," he said. Derek turned his head slightly, looking at him with confusion, not quite understanding what he meant. His eyes sparkled with unshed tears, and after waiting a while without an answer, he furrowed his brows in quiet bewilderment. "Why?" Edwin caught the faint scent of alcohol on him, mixed with a warm and sweet fruit fragrance, and felt his heartbeat rising steadily. Strangely compelling. People never seem satisfied. First, he'd only hoped for a simple gift, thinking it was enough just to watch from afar, but over time, the longing grew stronger, and even one extra second of waiting felt unbearable. "Because you're not mine," he said, staring into Derek's eyes, a faint smile touching his lips as he spoke slowly and clearly. "So I can't simply give in to your wishes." Derek froze, eyes wide open, as if unable to think. Edwin let out a soft breath, his gaze slowly drifting from the tip of Derek's nose down to his lips. "Do you remember? You still haven't answered me," he murmured, his voice carrying a soft sigh, but Derek suddenly felt as if he'd struck a thin wire, tense and trembling at the very edge of his heart. "Derek, people shouldn't be greedy." He stared at Edwin in silence, his eyes reflecting the other's image, flooded with confusion, uncertainty, and a quiet unease he couldn't explain. He stammered, "I'm not greedy, just..." "What was it?" Derek stayed silent for a long time before finally finding his words. "I'm just afraid. I'm afraid of what's to come." His voice was gentle, like that of a child struggling to solve a puzzle without success. Edwin's thumb brushed lightly across Derek's cheek, his tone soft and almost coaxing. "So what do you want now?" "A hug. If you want more, then you'll have to give me an answer." Derek bit his lip, speaking softly with a hint of nervousness. But for a brief moment, his drunken mind cleared slightly. His eyes went unfocused for a second before he turned back to Edwin, and heard him say, "Better wait until you're sober." Edwin let go, then quickly pulled Derek back into his arms. "This time is alone," he said, tightening his embrace and holding Derek firmly. "Next time, if you don't have an answer, there won't be another chance." Time passed, and Derek quietly rested in his arms, clearly very tired, his breathing gradually calming down. In the end, he said nothing more, only carefully adjusted the angle of the wheelchair to make Derek as comfortable as possible before guiding it slowly toward the bed. "Time's up," Edwin murmured softly. "You should go lie down now." Derek seemed to hear, letting out a faint hum, but didn't move. Edwin sighed and gently lifted him from his arms, placing him steadily onto the bed. Derek didn't seem disturbed at all, but still clung to Edwin's sleeve. The latter glanced down, then carefully uncurled each finger one by one before tucking in the blanket. After finishing, Edwin pushed the wheelchair back 2 steps. He sat still for a moment, silently watching Derek on the bed. After a long pause, he finally looked away and left the room. Derek lay in bed, feeling dazed and gradually drifted into sleep. Then Jack's phone call suddenly snapped him awake. He opened his eyes, staring at a thin beam of morning light creeping across the ceiling, and remained still for a long time. He replied to Jack, asking him to pick him up downstairs in an hour. Feeling he had plenty of time, he lay back on the bed, letting his mind go blank. In the long silence, memories from last night came flooding back. Derek didn't think he had a habit of revealing too much when drunk. He wasn't someone who overthought things, but for a brief moment last night, he felt truly tempted, almost wanting to tell Edwin, "I really do like this embrace. I want it," openly and honestly. He knew what that meant, but why did Edwin stop him in the end? Was it because drunk words shouldn't be trusted? Or was he afraid that tomorrow morning, Edwin might deny everything? Besides, wasn't it Edwin himself who accidentally kissed him during a sleepwalk? How come only the official gets to light fires while everyone else is forbidden from even lighting a candle? Did he really have to wait for something as simple as a hug like it was some kind of debt? That's so unfair. Derek stayed in bed for about 15 minutes before dragging himself up, then quickly took a shower. Edwin was still not back at the apartment. The breakfast prepared by the housekeeper sat on the table, but whether it was due to last night's drunkenness or his current mood, Derek couldn't taste anything. It all felt dull and unsatisfying. He didn't feel any better even when he arrived at the filming location. The filming set was brightly lit, with people moving about constantly. The camera crew was busy adjusting lenses, and the light assistant had passed by several times already. Derek sat in the makeup room, watching the makeup artist carefully shape his eyebrows. Though today's scenes weren't many, they were all crucial and subtle moments. Anthony rarely showed his true feelings on his face, making this role especially demanding in terms of micro-expressions and eye performance. The makeup artist adjusted his look carefully while quietly asking, "Derek, you seem a bit off today. Did you not get enough rest last night? Should I have someone bring you some warm tea to help?" Derek snapped back into focus and smiled at her. "I'm fine. It's probably just from celebrating with the Bird of Youth crew last night. I had a bit too much to drink." Still, he couldn't ignore the restless edge in his eyes. After finishing makeup and changing into costume, he stood at the edge of the set flipping through his script, trying to focus, but images from last night and fragments of dreams kept flashing through his mind like a rapid feed. "Derek, you can come on set now." The crew member came to notify him, and Derek nodded before closing his script. This scene was still with Caleb. After the flood in Guangzhou, the Crown Prince accepted Anthony's series of disaster relief proposals, submitted a petition to the Emperor requesting to lead the relief efforts, and earned high praise from the throne. Wyatt wasn't acting out of genuine concern for the people or kindness. His goal was simply to gain favor with the Emperor and strengthen his position as Crown Prince. Fortunately, his advisor was exceptionally clever, not only devising a way to quietly gather relief funds from powerful families without conflict, but also gathering skilled talents who worked through the night to complete detailed design plans for the Water Conservancy project. After the morning court session, Wyatt returned home with a broad smile and warmly embraced Anthony, who was just about to kneel. The Crown Princess arrived late and witnessed it all, but said nothing, simply stepping quietly aside. "Your Highness," Anthony murmured with a slight hesitation. "This isn't proper protocol." Wyatt paid no mind, a broad smile playing on his lips as he pulled Anthony closer. He waved away the attendants, his voice carrying a proud delight. "Anthony, what does protocol matter? Without you, how could I have made such an impression before His Majesty? All these achievements are deeply remembered by me." "Go on," Wyatt whispered, lowering his voice. "What reward do you desire?" "Once we return to the capital after the relief efforts, I'll take you to Zhanshui Hot Springs for some rest. How does that sound?" A brief glint of coldness flashed in Anthony's eyes but vanished quickly. He smiled faintly, his tone calm and respectful. "Your Highness overvalues me. I've merely done my duty. It is Your Highness's wise decisions that have earned the Emperor's trust. I've only offered a few suggestions. How could I claim such credit?" Wyatt's smile deepened. He released Anthony, turned and ascended the steps to take his seat on the throne, lifting his teacup with a delicate sip. Pride shone across his features. Once this relief mission concludes successfully, His Majesty will finally see that I am not just an heir apparent, but a true leader capable of bearing the burdens of our nation. No matter what those petty scholars say or who watches jealously, nothing can touch me then. You see, isn't this exactly what I deserve? Anthony lowered his head and kept both hands at his sides, his tone still composed. "Your Highness's great legacy is beyond my judgment, but please remember, there are still dangerous forces lurking in the capital. Caution must not be let down." Wyatt raised an eyebrow, silently urging him to continue. "Your Highness, now is a time of great visibility. Extra caution is needed, even if the Emperor is pleased." Emily and the faction supporting Wu Wang, along with certain officials harboring hidden ambitions, may not truly wish for you to gain widespread public favor. Though this relief effort has become a celebrated event, many fear your growing influence and might secretly work against you. Wyatt spoke directly. "So what should I do?" Anthony offered a calm smile, his voice steady and unhurried. "The relief campaign is indeed Your Highness's great achievement, but sharing credit wisely is the key to lasting strength. I suggest placing some of the hands-on responsibilities with local officials while petitioning His Majesty to attribute this success to Heaven's benevolent grace. In this way, you'll ease suspicions from others and strengthen your image as a dutiful and humble servant." After hearing this, Wyatt's expression gradually softened. He nodded slowly, You make sense. Then I'll leave these arrangements to you. Your orders are received, Anthony said with a bow, but as he turned away, all warmth vanished, replaced by an unyielding coldness. The scene shifted, the set lights dimmed, and Mason called out, "Cut." The take was successfully completed. Derek gradually stepped back from the emotional state of the performance, standing quietly to catch his breath. He was a seasoned professional by now. After several encounters with Edwin's emotional turbulence, he had learned to perfectly separate his real-life feelings from his acting. As soon as Mason called action, he could quickly immerse himself in the role. But when Caleb was brought into the scene, a brief moment of hesitation still flickered, unavoidably reminding him of the fleeting warmth he'd felt last night in Edwin's embrace. It was mostly because the pose had been rather unguarded. Just thinking about it made Derek feel his cheeks grow warm, but fortunately, that brief moment of distraction didn't disrupt anything. Onlookers even thought those few seconds of hesitation looked like a carefully crafted reaction Derek had prepared after deeply studying his script. By the time Derek wandered over to the monitor dazedly, Mason even called out, "Nice job today. Your performance was solid." Unbeknownst to everyone, Derek felt as though his soul were splitting in two, and only by forcing himself to focus elsewhere could he make sense of what was being said. Levi had been assigned to another team for filming the second part of the Liang Kingdom series. During a break, Derek took the water Jack handed him and sipped it slowly, only to realize he didn't have anyone to talk to. He leaned back on the RV's sofa, his head resting against the cushion. Seeing this, Jack leaned in curiously. "Hey Derek, what's wrong? Do you have a headache? My roommate used to get one every morning after drinking." Derek gave him a sideways glance, thinking this earnest assistant would never make it as an emotional counselor. He let out a sigh. Jack looked utterly confused. "Derek, do you have something on your mind?" But this straightforward assistant had an unstoppable curiosity, hurriedly crouching down beside him with earnest words. "I'm not exactly a genius, and I might not fully understand what's going on in your head, but if you're really struggling inside, you can talk to me. It's always better to speak it out than keep it bottled up." Derek firmly refused. "No thanks." Jack leaned in a little more. "You should." Afraid Derek might misunderstand his intentions, Jack paused for a moment before explaining. "Emma sent me a few articles last week about famous actors who developed depression after getting too deep into their roles. Early support is key, Derek. If you talk about it now while it's still just emotional distress, it'll be much easier than waiting until it turns into something serious." Derek grabbed a piece of bread from the table and stuffed it in Jack's mouth. "It's not that bad," he said, exasperated. "Honestly, I wonder what kind of wild thoughts are running around in your head." Derek muttered after a pause, then added reluctantly, "But it's not really a big deal. Since you're so curious, I'll tell you." Jack quickly dragged over a small stool and sat down beside him, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Derek suddenly felt embarrassed and couldn't bring himself to say it. He took a deep breath and said, "It's just, I have this friend who got asked out recently." Jack perked up instantly at the news, his eyes widening with excitement as he spoke, his voice tinged with barely contained eagerness. "Derek, are you saying your friend was drinking at someone's place and, when things got heated, just blurted out how he felt? What happened next? What did that person say?" Derek said, "He admitted it." Jack pressed on. "So did your friend say yes or no?" Derek shifted his head slightly, pretending to be nonchalant. "He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either." Jack paused for a second, scratching his head as he tried to process the information. He frowned and asked, "So what does that even mean? Stringing someone along?" "Not stringing anyone along," Derek said, his tone a little uneasy, eyes drifting toward the window. "He's just really conflicted and unsure. The other person is kind of special. He feels things are complicated, can't predict what might happen later. He's afraid of a bad outcome." Jack scratched his head thoughtfully and said seriously, "Still, I think it's better to clear things up sooner rather than later. What if your friend actually feels something but doesn't say anything? The other person might get hurt waiting for a reply and then just walk away. Then there'd be no chance at all. Honestly, love comes down to one simple thing. I like you or I'm not interested. That's it. Just that easy." Derek stayed quiet, resting his chin on his hand, realizing he probably shouldn't have tried explaining such a deep topic to someone so straightforward. "But actually, my roommate, the one who's kind of a jerk, Back then he had this really strange trick. Jack said, eyeing Derek carefully, when things got that close, he'd just kiss someone straight away. If it felt natural, they were into each other. If not, they'd call it quits, throw him out and have him executed. What a disgrace. Derek shot back with an eye roll, but then he couldn't help remembering that kiss he once shared with Edwin. He hadn't really pulled away. After all, last time he mentioned it to Levi, he'd been teased about it. Regardless, love is something serious. You can't treat it like this so carelessly. Derek sighed and slumped onto the table with a quiet, discouraged air. Jack watched him frown at the mess he was in, then leaned on his chin for a moment. Suddenly, it seemed like something clicked. He looked up thoughtfully and asked hesitantly, "So this special person is kind of important to you, isn't he?" Derek glanced at him briefly, his lips twitching slightly. After a long silence, he nodded slowly. Jack's face lit up with sudden understanding as he cleared his throat and spoke in a mock-serious tone. "Derek, has your friend ever thought about this question?" "What?" Jack paused between each word. If that night had been someone else in front of him, would he have even asked? Or, after asking, would he still have hesitated like this? Derek was briefly stunned by those words, actually taking a moment to imagine the situation Jack had described. He couldn't quite put into words how he felt about Edwin. Maybe it was that early period after arriving in this world, when he'd developed something like a protective instinct, or perhaps because Edwin had helped him so much that he naturally wanted to set him apart from others. But more likely, deep down, Edwin had already become someone truly special. So if that night had been with anyone else, he might have cut things off the moment he noticed any signs much sooner. Derek fell into deep thought. Jack saw his reaction and added, "But Derek, even though I've been single for over 20 years, from my limited experience, I'd say, don't hold it in, follow your heart. Otherwise, you'll regret it one day." Derek felt a slight stirring inside, then reached out and ruffled Jack's hair with a chuckle, teasing, "You're surprisingly insightful, but he still seems afraid of what might come." Derek murmured. He said he had a not-so-good dream. Something about their ending being bad and feeling very real. "What's a dream gonna do?" Jack countered. "I used to keep dreaming my crush was with the class rep in high school, but years later I found out one didn't like guys and the other didn't like girls. Plus they'd still argue all the time about who forgot to clean the lab. If you never start because you're scared of how it ends, what's even the point of living?" Derek looked at Jack with a hint of surprise, never expecting such deep thoughts to come from him. Jack felt slightly self-conscious under his gaze and scratched the back of his short hair. "Anyway, I just think everyone's going to die eventually. The end is the same for all. Why sweat over something that hasn't happened yet? Today's today, tomorrow's tomorrow. If you feel something now, go for it. If not tomorrow, we'll figure it out then." Derek couldn't help but twitch his lips a little. Seeing that Derek seemed to be coming back to himself, Jack let out a quiet sigh and didn't say anything, just calmly reached for his phone and started playing. Derek caught a glimpse of the snake game on Jack's screen, staring at it blankly for nearly half a minute before pulling out his own phone. He scrolled through the chat window a few times. No new messages popped up, and gave a small sigh before putting his phone away. Suddenly, it struck him. He tapped into Edwin's profile and found that all the previous posts had vanished, leaving only one cold line at the top. What does this mean? Derek stared at Edwin's profile picture, opening and closing it repeatedly, but still couldn't press the send button. He leaned back on the sofa, caught in a strange emptiness, wanting to talk to Edwin but unsure what to say. Felt like anything he wrote would come across as forced. After a few minutes, he gave up and shut the phone off with a sigh, then slumped back over the table, lying there motionless. But then he felt a little uneasy, remembering that the RV was a gift from Edwin. Oh, and even the driver was someone he had hired. Well then, after returning to the hotel, Derek impatiently walked into the bathroom for a shower. The sound of water filled the room, steam rising and blurring the reflection on the glass. Derek closed his eyes, letting the stream wash over him, hoping to clear his mind a little, but no matter how hard he tried, that person's presence lingered in his thoughts. A fleeting memory of the warm embrace from yesterday and Edwin's quiet words, "It's time," made him feel a strange tightness in his chest. After finishing his shower, he sat on the bed, lost in thought, before finally giving in and picking up his phone to send Edwin a message. "Derek, thank you for looking after me last night. I saw you had already left when I woke up. Did I cause too much trouble?" Derek, My assistant said a new fusion restaurant just opened near the film city, and it's really good. Will Edwin be coming to check it out again? I'd like to treat you to dinner. After sending the message, he stared blankly at the screen, waiting for a long time without any reply. Felt no worse than being torn apart by anxiety. After checking his message history for what seemed like the 100th time, Derek finally placed his phone on the nightstand with a sigh and turned restlessly in bed. This time, he didn't dream at all, but felt more awake than when waking from a dream. Edwin replied to his message the next morning, explaining that he had been discussing business matters with a partner the night before and hadn't seen the message. AS, we probably won't go to the film studio after all. Go ahead and eat by yourself. AS, and I also didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Derek read the message and clenched the water bottle in frustration, nearly spraying Jack beside him. Edwin had seemed busy lately, and after that reply, Derek didn't hear from him again. He wasn't one for posting anyway, and after clearing out his social feed, it felt unusually quiet. Derek sometimes checked in after filming ended, only to find an empty line and the note visible for day. But James's account was updated more regularly. One day showing some massive bookshelf from who knew where, another day a cup of coffee on Edwin's dining table at home, and the next a lush patch of small blue flowers thriving in his office. Occasionally, a photo would accidentally catch a pair of hands with prominent knuckles, one wearing a simple plain band on the ring finger. Derek recognized it. The same style as the ring Edwin had personally placed on his hand at the old Moo family mansion. He'd returned it to Edwin right after New Year's Eve, thinking it was just a performance for family eyes, but he never expected Edwin still wore it. Derek felt his face warm. He was so eager, he almost wished he could fly straight to a city, sit beside Edwin's wheelchair, and look into his eyes to finally find out why Edwin ever liked him in the first place. Then maybe they could exchange something, both of them wanting what the other had. Derek stayed on set for several days because some scenes were hard to book, and they worked nearly around the clock. Sometimes they'd spend until midnight fine-tuning tiny details in a single scene, but most of the time, Mason stuck to reasonable human schedules and didn't push filming into anything overly intense. It wasn't until they finished Anthony's early scenes set in the prince's residence that Derek finally got 2 days off. He immediately had Jack book tickets to fly back to a city, eager beyond words to see Edwin again. Maybe seeing him in person would help Derek better understand what he truly wanted. But he hadn't expected his private trip to leak out like this. Neither the fan club nor the agency had arranged anything. But as soon as Derek stepped off the plane, he was surrounded by people from nowhere. Completely trapped. It's really Derek, SN-twinned rising through the night still being filmed? Why is he suddenly back in a city? Any new endorsement? When are you doing a variety show? We want to see you on real-life TV. Derek was momentarily stunned by the sudden wave of enthusiasm. He lowered the brim of his baseball cap and instinctively took a half step back. But then Jack grabbed his arm. Come on, Derek, don't freeze up. Hurry, or we won't get out. Jack whispered, crouching low while signaling the bodyguards to rush over and clear a path. At the same time, a new message popped up on Derek's phone. ES. Follow them. I'll meet you in the parking lot. Derek quietly checked his phone, then hastily pressed it off. Only then did he realize where Jack's calm confidence came from. He struggled through the crowd that had nearly blocked all movement, dodging camera lenses that kept getting too close, finally making it to the underground parking garage. Jack leaned against the trunk of the car and panted, "Man, this is getting wilder by the day. If you get any more famous, forget about going anywhere alone." Derek was adjusting his crooked collar and cap when he heard that. He gave a casual reply, "Then I'll just stay out of sight as much as possible. Better to keep things low-key." Jack took a few breaths to calm down, then looked at the heavily tinted windows ahead. "I'm going to hail a ride. Derek, text me if you need anything. Make sure Emma covers it. Of course, I'm your top student. Wouldn't dream of letting myself go hungry." Derek let out a soft laugh, nodded, then bent down and slid into the car. The car door slammed shut. He hadn't even had time to relax when he looked up and met Edwin's gaze. He'd been reading something on the seat, a thin folder open on his lap. But now he closed the file without a word and stared at Derek with that calm, steady look he always had. Derek's mind went blank. Nothing came to mind for how to start the conversation. Then Edwin reached out suddenly, his fingertip brushing lightly against Derek's cheek. The next moment he frowned. Edwin's eyes were deep, like a whirlpool. The touch across his cheek sent a faint sting, and Derek flinched instinctively, yet couldn't help but follow the movement with his gaze. A few seconds passed before Derek realized exactly where he'd been touched. It wasn't from the collision just now, Derek explained. It's a scratch I got during filming. In last night's scene, Prince Wyatt was framed by Emily's faction and returned home furious. As Anthony was about to enter the study to calm him down, he was struck squarely by a flying bamboo scroll. The edge of the bamboo scroll was somewhat sharp, though it was filmed using angle tricks. Derek reacted just a fraction too slowly and barely missed getting cut. Just a small mark. It nearly gave Caleb a scare, but in reality, it was only very shallow, forming a faint scab by night. He had been wearing a baseball cap earlier, and his loose strands naturally covered most of the area, so no one noticed. Turns out Edwin's eyes were surprisingly sharp. Edwin's gaze swept over the faintly reddened mark. Maybe it was the dim light inside the car, but Derek felt his eyes deep and intense in a way that stirred unease. After a long pause, Edwin pulled his hand back, briefly brushing the hair hidden under the cap with his fingertip, then murmured softly, "Be more careful next time." Derek could almost hear his own heartbeat, vivid and fast, each thud heavy as it came down. "I'll be careful," he said. "You don't need to worry." Edwin withdrew his gaze and leaned back into the seat. A quiet stillness settled in the car, the atmosphere delicate and charged. After so many days had passed, Derek expected Edwin to ask about his decision. But he said nothing, asked nothing, without meaning to. Derek lowered his head and pressed down on the cap's brim, feeling his heartbeat roar in his ears. The strange tension made him unconsciously pinch his lips. After a moment of thought, he finally broke the silence. "How did you know I was coming back today?" Edwin turned slightly, paused for several seconds, then replied, "Your agent said there'd be a crowd at the airport, and you'd likely get swarmed. I happened to be nearby, so I came over." If he'd heard that just when they first met, Derek might have bought it without question. But now he wondered, where were the bodyguards? Could they really all be pulled in on short notice? But he didn't press further, just gave a quiet For a brief moment, it felt like the clouds had parted. His fears and doubts dissipated completely. He leaned back into the seat. Outside, neon lights flickered and swayed across the cityscape. His mental count climbed slowly. He rehearsed multiple opening lines in his head, but couldn't find one that felt right. Meanwhile, his heartbeat grew more rapid with each passing second. Then the car finally stopped at Edwin's apartment building. As Derek opened the door, a wave of cold air rushed in, making him shiver. His heart felt like it might burst through his thin skin, yet Edwin still asked, as if he didn't know, "Are you staying here tonight?" Derek's mouth spoke before his mind could catch up. "Then where would I go? Sleep on the streets?" Edwin paused, then let out a soft laugh. Derek twirled a strand of hair between his fingers, eyes down as he dragged his toe across the floor, mentally noting that he really needed to work on not blurting things out when flustered. The two stepped into the elevator and returned to the apartment. The keypad lock clicked open at once, and the city skyline outside the window spilled through the glass, casting a warm glow across one corner of the living room. "Are we eating in tonight?" Derek asked casually. "I heard Auntie's off again. I figured you wouldn't be back today, so I didn't ask her to cook," Edwin said, guiding his wheelchair toward the kitchen counter as if heading for a drink. "I can make something if it comes down to that. We could order in," Derek said while opening the fridge. "Actually, I had something important I wanted to." Then came a sudden sound from nearby, a clattering noise, like something hitting the floor. He jumped in surprise, quickly shut the fridge door, and turned around to see Edwin sitting beside the counter, not far from his wheelchair, with a cup rolling across the ground. The cup spun slowly, then came to rest on the living room carpet, while drops of water continued to fall onto the counter in front of Edwin. "Are you okay, Edwin?" he asked, glancing at the dripping water dispenser before rushing over to turn off the button. He quietly assessed the distance in his mind and guessed that Auntie must have accidentally pushed the dispenser a bit too far inward during cleaning, making it hard for Edwin to reach. Hence the mishap. Edwin said, "I'm fine, just bumped into it by accident." Derek grabbed a few sheets of paper and wiped up the water on the counter. Then he touched it with his hand and realized it was hot. It wasn't scalding, but if it had landed on clothes, it wouldn't have been a pleasant experience. Derek lowered his head to check on Edwin's condition, blurting out almost without thinking, Did any of it splash onto you? Edwin lifted his eyes to look at him, not answering right away. Only one lamp was on in the living room. The soft golden light fell from behind him, casting a shadow across Edwin's face. Their dark eyes looked deep and still, like ink spilled into water, hiding every thought beneath. Derek assumed he was just reluctant to speak. After all, Edwin was always proud, likely not wanting anyone to see him in such a vulnerable state. But with the dark pants, it was hard to tell if there were any wet marks. Acting on instinct, Derek leaned down and his fingers brushed gently against Edwin's leg. Feeling the warm, dry touch and confirming no hot water had splashed, Derek let out a sigh of relief. But as he looked up, he met Edwin's teasing gaze. "What are you doing?" His voice suddenly dropped low, like the tide at night. Derek heard his breathing, and after a brief 2 seconds, Edwin spoke again. "You should remember what I told you before?" Derek wanted to say, "You've said so many things. I can't even recall which one," but somewhere in his mind, it felt like an automatic search had triggered, and the answer came out hazy anyway. Edwin had told him that his leg was sensitive. Derek's face turned bright red. He said, his hand on the armrest subtly rubbing against it. "If I say I didn't mean to, just saw you weren't responding and thought you might be hurt and didn't want to speak up, I swear I had no intention of taking advantage. Would you believe me?" Still, even if he did touch on purpose, probably wouldn't matter. After tonight, they'd be free to be close like that anyway. Besides, he'd already owed a favor once. What's one more? With that thought, Derek instantly felt confident again. What if I said I don't believe you? There was nothing he could do about it. Derek's heartbeat suddenly quickened, and without warning, Edwin lifted his upper body off the chair. He felt the other man's breath brush against his eyelids and nose, his lashes trembling uncontrollably. His breathing seemed thick and heavy. In the flickering reflection of Edwin's eyes, Derek saw himself. Though he couldn't read the expression, still, he guessed he must look dazed and a little foolish, much like a scholar who'd stumbled into an ancient woodland spirit's den for the first time. Bewildered, lost, their warm breaths mingled, and Edwin locked eyes with him. Steadfast, just like that night. For a moment, Derek almost believed he'd do it again. Just as he had that night, gripping his wrist to pull him close. Instinctively, Derek leaned forward slightly, but suddenly, Edwin let out a soft laugh, as if deliberately tearing apart the growing tension in the air. He leaned back into his chair again, eyes still fixed on him, lips curling in a half-smile as he asked, "What were you thinking?" Derek froze, his thoughts thrown off balance but not quite brought back to reality by that sound. He only realized later that, rather than dreading some uncertain outcome, what he truly felt in that moment was excitement and eagerness. The urge to see his usual calm shatter shock, confusion, and other vivid emotions all at once. His body acted before his mind could catch up, gently pressing his lips to Edwin's in a hesitant kiss. His heartbeat surged instantly, as if every cell in his body was cheering for this moment. Edwin hadn't expected such a sudden move. He paused, stunned for a few seconds, then stared at him with wide eyes, almost like someone preparing to face a challenge, and couldn't help but smile. At the moment, he deliberately knocked over the water. All he'd wanted was a small token of attention, but he never imagined Derek would give him so much more than that. His hand gripping the armrest tightened, as if consciously keeping the wheelchair from moving too far away. Edwin teased, "Is it still okay?" Derek's eyes were blurry with moisture, a faint red spreading at the corners. His gaze drifted aimlessly toward Edwin's face. He parted his lips and murmured, "Edwin's pretty good at kissing." Edwin placed his hand on Derek's hair, gently running his fingertips along the soft strands. A sudden impulse rose within him, wanting to pull Derek up and hold him in his lap like before, kissing him again. But there were more important things at hand. What kind of reward would there be? Edwin's expression remained calm, his deep voice carrying a hint of teasing. Derek's face turned red instantly, his heart pounding wildly as if it might burst. He instinctively tried to rise from Edwin's lap, but whether from numb legs or being dazed by the kiss, he couldn't stand at first. Only managing to get up with support from the bar, the heat in his face flared once more. It wasn't embarrassment over acting on impulse. Rather, he felt his reaction was embarrassingly obvious. "What kind of reward do you want?" Derek said, lowering his head and avoiding eye contact, stealing glances at Edwin's legs, his gaze briefly lingering on the smooth fabric of his trousers as he spoke softly. You tell me, maybe I'll agree. Edwin thought he looked like a sly little cat. He already had his own thoughts and knew exactly what he was asking, but for some reason, he didn't want to say it out loud. Instead, he waited for someone else to bring the words to him so he could easily agree. Felt awkward, yet vivid and oddly charming. Derek pulled his hands behind him, nervously rubbing the bar counter with his fingers to hide his nerves. After seeing Edwin in the car, he'd rehearsed several opening lines, planning to tell him his answer properly after dinner, only to lose control at the moment and scatter all his preparations. But actually, it made perfect sense. After all, he'd always been someone whose carefully prepared plans were easily disrupted by sudden surprises, while rushing ahead without thinking often ended up leading him right to the outcome he wanted. Life is full of unexpected turns, just like how, after finishing his report and heading down for a late-night snack, he'd mapped out several possible routes, but then stopped dead in the middle of the stairs, completely changing the course of his life. And that kind of twist fit him perfectly. Thinking this, Derek suddenly curled his eyes into a quiet smile. Edwin, did you know this isn't our first time kissing? Seeing that Edwin hadn't figured out what to say and was just staring at him, Derek leaned back against the bar and spoke up suddenly. Edwin's gaze flickered over his lower lip. I guessed it. He didn't remember anything from that night, but the next morning, he could always sense something strange in his body, especially after Austin's earlier hint and Derek's subtle avoidance during those days, which made it easy to figure out what had happened. But since his shy-hearted partner never brought it up, Edwin naturally wouldn't be the one to start talking about it. Shouldn't you remember what happened that night? Derek said casually. Edwin lifted his eyes to look at him and asked, Do you want me to remember? Derek hesitated for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. Just remember today. What I mean is, I finally figured out the answer you're looking for, he said, letting go of the bar counter and stepping forward slightly, one hand resting on the wheelchair's armrest. Edwin, want to explore something beyond our usual client and provider relationship? Like dating. After saying that, he paused for a moment in silence, murmuring, I guess this would be like both of us agreeing to cancel the contract. Probably no compensation involved? Edwin was almost brought to laughter by Derek's sudden, whimsical remark. No way, he said, gripping Derek's hand. The promise I made to you, I'll keep it. Derek pouted. Do I really seem like that kind of person? He leaned in slightly, staring straight into Edwin's eyes. Besides, we're talking about something personal right now. Don't change the subject. It wasn't clear who had veered off track first. Edwin gently folded Derek's hand into his own, tracing the back of it with his fingertips. His dark eyes seemed to hold a vast, endless night. Wasn't that just an impulse just now, after that kiss? His tone remained calm and steady, as always faintly cold and low. Of course it was, Derek said. He felt like he'd finally sorted through the aftermath of that kiss. Or maybe it was just adrenaline from being honest now, making him feel completely fearless. Because I could tell you were about to kiss me. Exactly when I also wanted it, so reaching out for it? That makes perfect sense. Edwin gave his thumb a gentle squeeze and suddenly smiled. So you still haven't given me your answer, Derek said. Want to start something real with me? Of course. Edwin took his hand. I really want that. It was strange. This kind of intense feeling in Edwin's eyes was something new. His dark pupils flickered like a candlelight trembling behind a torn paper window. Derek felt as if he'd been burned by a flame, instinctively pulling his fingers back. Actually, Derek asked, you never told me why you like me in the first place. Not that I have any self-doubt or anything. I just don't really feel like I've done much to earn it. Edwin looked up at him. You're definitely misunderstanding yourself. Edwin released his hand, paused thoughtfully, then spoke in a quiet tone. I don't really remember now. Maybe it was that night when you and William argued in the old estate's backyard. I suddenly found you interesting. Derek tried to recall what had happened, remembering only the moment he'd been pushed down. His backside stung badly. His gaze toward Edwin now held more suspicion and disbelief. Oh right, he was all pink-haired back then. What's wrong? Edwin looked at him, his voice softening slightly, as if guiding. What did you want to tell me? Derek shook his head, forcing a stiff smile and cautiously said, Is your taste a bit unusual? Now it was Edwin who looked puzzled, but Derek found the expression on Edwin's face oddly contrasting, and couldn't help letting out a quiet laugh. The other hand that had been free now rested on the wheelchair's armrest as he leaned forward, his nose nearly touching Edwin's. It was close. Heartbeats mingling so closely they couldn't be told apart, breaths blending into one another without distinction. Derek paused for a moment, realizing his rational thoughts had given way to instinct. He spoke slowly and clearly. "I'm going to make up for what happened that night." Edwin remained still in the wheelchair, hands folded neatly on his lap. Upon hearing this, he raised an eyebrow. Derek felt that look carried a hint of challenge, stirring something deeper inside him. The next moment, he leaned in to close the distance. What he first noticed was Edwin's crisp woody musk, blended with a hint of delicate orange blossom and jasmine. Just smelling it made his mind feel dizzy. Suddenly, the doorbell rang out without warning. Derek jumped back sharply, stumbled a few steps, and his lower back bumped once again against the countertop. What on earth was that? Who's interrupting his moment like this? Edwin looked as if his mood had been spoiled, lazily lifting his eyelids with a faintly disappointed glance toward Derek. "It must be the chef James arranged," Edwin said, brushing a few stray strands from his forehead with a sigh. "It's disappointing this happened now. A chef? What kind of chef?" Derek asked, clearly confused. "Can't have you cooking dinner yourself," Edwin said. "I had James set it up in advance, but didn't expect the timing to be this bad." Then he looked at Derek's still faint expression and asked, "Shall we continue?" Derek thought with a pained sigh. He definitely hadn't been the type to keep people out while secretly doing things inside. "I'll go open the door," he said reluctantly, rubbing his face before heading toward the entryway. The chef who had arrived was already busy in the kitchen, so Derek didn't feel right lingering outside with Edwin. He went back to his bedroom and took off his jacket, planning to change into something more comfortable. His phone buzzed from the pocket of his jacket. He pulled it out casually. On the screen appeared a post from an anonymous forum with a bold headline, "Need help with love confession phrases? Urgent." Derek replied to the top few comments, then began drafting his own thoughts on what worked best, also wondering, in passing, what couples could do together at home after a successful confession. How about watching a movie together? That film we didn't finish last time at the hotel is still on my mind. I'm curious how it ends, but that movie did have a few scenes with strong suggestive content. Would asking Edwin to watch it seem like a subtle hint? Derek was lost in thought, fingers just starting to type, when he heard a soft sound from the bedroom door. He turned around. Edwin's wheelchair had somehow rolled into the room without him noticing. Edwin was watching him from not far away. "Is there something you need, Edwin?" Derek asked. Edwin's wheelchair moved a little closer. "Why are you still calling me that?" After a pause, Derek suddenly remembered his earlier playful response to William, jokingly saying, "Maybe because it feels more special?" Edwin stared at him silently. Then, after 2 seconds, he suddenly grabbed Derek's hand and pulled him closer. Derek ended up crashing into his arms again. "You said you liked being held," Edwin murmured, turning slightly and brushing a gentle kiss against Derek's forehead. "Is this a compensation?" Derek paused for a moment, then gently rested his hand on Edwin's back and mumbled, "It's not just about being held. I like being held by you."